Good morning. I'm at-large Councilmember Christina Henderson, Chair of the Committee on Health, not the Committee of the Whole, but today I will be chairing this hearing. Today is Thursday, June 22nd, 2023. The time is 10 a.m. and we are in room 500 of the John A. Wilson building. We are holding this hearing today to consider Bill 25-278, the School Student Vaccination Amendment Act of 2023, and to discuss a change in the staffing model for the school health suites that will start in school year 23-24. I introduced Bill 25-278 along with Chairman Mendelson on April 27, 2023. The bill would repeal the requirement that this council passed at the height of the COVID-19 pandemic that all children must receive the COVID-19 vaccine to attend school. I want to emphasize at this outset that the COVID-19 vaccine is still a crucial tool for preventing serious illness and death related to COVID-19. It is incredibly safe for children and adults. I wish that this legislation was not necessary and that more children in the district have received the vaccine, but the reality is that currently this requirement will keep too many children out of the classroom, likely doing more harm than good. I look forward to discussing with the government witnesses how the district plans to continue educating families and youth about the importance of getting vaccinated, not just for COVID-19, but for all of the routine pediatric vaccinations. In December 2021, when the council voted to pass this legislation, or the original bill, Coronavirus Immunization of School Students and Early Childhood Workers Amendment Act of 2021, the district was in the midst of an unprecedented surge of COVID-19 cases stemming from a new Omicron variant. Many district residents were dying each and every week, most of whom were Black. At the time, this measure seemed to be our best chance in terms of containing this virus. A year and a half later, the landscape for COVID has changed considerably. Transmission rates have been low for months, and much of the district has opened back up to business as usual. We also have more tools at our disposal now, not only vaccines that present hospitalization and death, but also effective antivirals for the most vulnerable. Reflecting this shift, DC is the only remaining state that still has COVID-19 vaccine as a requirement for attending school on the books. At the public roundtable in October of 22, hosted by a committee, I'm not sure which one, district education leadership testified that of the difficulty of enforcing this requirement and convincing families to get their children vaccinated against COVID-19. Unfortunately, misinformation about the safety and efficacy of the vaccine has been hard to quell. And as of January 23, 70% of 5-year-olds and 50% of 12-year-olds in the district had not received the full 2 doses. Data shows that families are much more willing to be compliant with other routine pediatric vaccinations compared with COVID-19 vaccination. And we must take policy as realist. And the reality of the situation is that the information vacuum has created by the pandemic also created opportunities for falsehoods to flourish. We don't want to exclude students from the classroom after working so hard with education leaders to get them back in person. Switching gears to the school nurses, which we will also be discussing today with DC Health and the Children's School Nurses Services, a new school health staffing model that will be rolled out next school year. Although I believe we all share the same goal to have a full-time licensed nurse in every school health suite, the reality is of the longstanding national nurse shortage exacerbated by the COVID-19 pandemic has made it close to impossible. Currently, almost half of the public and public charter schools do not have a full-time nurse. This means that when a child gets sick or injured at school, the health suite is locked and dark. And teachers and school administrators have to take on this additional task of caring for a sick or injured child. I'm pleased to see that DC Health and Children's are working collaboratively and creatively to develop an alternative model that will ensure better staff coverage of our health suites, and look forward to hearing more about it. Looking to see if any of my colleagues have joined. They have not. So let's discuss how we're going to operate today. We have 19 public witnesses who have signed up. I want to review the guidelines. So witnesses will have 3 minutes to speak. 4 minutes to speak. Please be conscientious of your time. I'll give you a nudge when your time has expired to preserve sufficient time for all public witnesses to speak today. I would also like to emphasize to those who are here and watching at home that again, the DC Council firmly believes in the safety and efficacy of all vaccines. If anyone communicates misinformation not based in science about vaccine in their testimony, I will reiterate this after their testimony. I will also encourage anyone wishing to learn more about the science of vaccines to visit the CDC website. I will now call up the first panel of witnesses. For those who have not joined us for a hybrid hearing before, you need to affirmatively accept our invitation to be promoted as a panelist. We will go 8 at a time, see where we go from there. So Naya Garrett, Kamari Hunter Mays, Jane Helwell, Christabel Cheyenne, apologies if I'm butchering your last name, Elizabeth Mumper, Matt Irwin, Diane Perlman, and Rachel Johnston. I see Naya, I hope I'm saying your name right. You can go ahead.
Okay. Good morning, Chairperson Mendelson, Councilmember Henderson, and staff. My name is Kamari Hunter Mays, and I'm a rising 10th grader at DC International Public Charter School. I'm also the president of the nation's capital chapter of Jack and Jill of America's Gavel Club. Thank you for the opportunity to testify today. My Gavalier, who will introduce herself shortly to you, will be providing a testimony on the subject bill, and I will provide the Spanish interpretation of her testimony to make the testimony on this issue more inclusive. Buenos días, Presidente Directivo Mendelson, y concejal, miembro del Consejo Henderson. Mi nombre es Kamari Hunter Mays y soy un estudiante de 10º grado en la escuela de DC International Public Charter. También soy la presidente del capítulo de la organización capital de la Nación de Jack and Jill of America's Gavel Club. Gracias por la oportunidad de permitirme testificar hoy. Mi colega Gavalier, quien se presentará con ustedes en breve, brindará su testimonio sobre el proyecto de ley y yo brindaré la traducción al español de su testimonio para que el testimonio sobre este tema sea más inclusivo.
My name is Naya Garrett. I'm a rising 8th grader at Capitol Hill Day School, and I'm past president of the nation's capital chapter of Jack and Jill Gavel Club. Although the opportunity to testify today was facilitated by the Gavel Club of the nation's capital chapter of Jack and Jill of America, my position on this bill is my individual opinion and does not necessarily reflect the views of my chapter or a national organization or the Gavel Club Auxiliary of Toastmasters International. Today, my testimony will focus on Bill 25-278, the School Vaccination Amendment Act of 2023. I'm here to tell you why I think the school vaccination policy should remain in place.
Mi nombre es Naya Garrett. Soy un estudiante de 8º grado en la escuela Capitol Hill Day y soy la presidenta pasada del capítulo de la organización capital de la Nación de Jack and Jill of America, Inc., Gavel Club. Aunque la oportunidad de testificar fue facilitada por el Gavel Club of the National's Capital Chapter of Jack and Jill of America, Inc., y estoy acompañado por mi colega Gabriel Kamari, mi posición sobre este proyecto de ley es mi opinión individual y no refleja necesariamente los puntos de vista de mi capítulo ni de la capital de la nación o el Gavel Club auxiliar de Toastmasters International. Hoy mi testimonio se centrará en el proyecto de la ley 25-268, la ley de denominada vacunación a estudiantes escolares de 2023. Estoy aquí para decirles por qué creo que la política de vacunación escolar debe permanecer vigente.
First, I'm vaccinated, and so is my intermediate family. We did not take these decisions lightly, but we wanted to do our part to protect our family, friends, school community, and the entire DC community. Most kids in my school were vaccinated outside of religious exemptions, and this kept our COVID-19 cases extremely low. It also gave us a layer of protection from each other and kept our teachers and staff safe. More importantly, we were able to receive uninterrupted education and not lose anyone in the school community.
Primeramente, estoy vacunado y también lo está mi familia inmediata. No tomamos estas decisiones a la alegra, pero queremos hacer nuestra parte para proteger a nuestra familia, amigos y la comunidad escolar y toda la comunidad de DC. La mayoría de los niños en mi escuela estaban vacunados, fuera de excepciones religiosas. Esto mantuvo nuestros números de casos de COVID-19 extremadamente bajos. Pudimos socializar en la escuela, La vacuna maximizó la protección entre nuestros y mantuvo seguros a nuestros maestros y personal escolar. Más importante aún, pudimos recibir educación ininterrumpida y no perder ningún miembro de nuestra comunidad escolar.
Secondly, we know that the vaccination does not stop you from contracting COVID-19, but it does boost your chances of not dying from it. But it gave my classmates and I a better opportunity to not miss school, to participate in extracurricular activities, and to not have much of a disruption to our daily activities.
Segundo, sabemos que la vacunación no evita que te contagies con el virus COVID-19, pero sí aumenta tus posibilidades de no morir a causa de este. La vacuna nos dio a mis compañeros de clase y a mí una mejor oportunidad de no faltar a la escuela, de participar en actividades extracurriculares y de no tener demasiadas interrupciones en nuestras actividades diarias.
Lastly, we are able to get back to our new normal. I really like seeing my classmates smile because they don't have to wear a mask. I like not having to stand 6 feet apart from the people I spend most of my day with. I like knowing that I have a layer of protection and I'm not going to get any of my teachers and friends sick. Most of all, I like that we're able to get back to a tradition at my school and participate in group gatherings and do some of the things we could do before COVID-19 disrupted our lives.
Por último, pudimos ver a nuestra nueva normalidad. Me gusta mucho ver sonreír a mis compañeros de clase porque no tienen que usar una mascarilla o cubrebocas. Me gusta no tener que estar 6 pies de distancia de las personas con las que paso la mayor parte del día. Me gusta saber que tengo la mayor protección y que no voy a enfermar a mis maestros y amigos. Sobre todo, me gusta que pudimos volver a la rutina en mi escuela y participar en reuniones grupales y hacer algunas cosas que solíamos hacer antes de COVID-19 interrumpiera nuestras vidas.
All this happened because my school community was vaccinated. Our success was attainable because we did our part as a cohesive unit. Now we can run in the park, play, have fun, and laugh, and enjoy these years we have left to be a kid.
Todo esto sucedió porque mi comunidad escolar se vacunó. Nuestro éxito fue posible porque hicimos nuestra parte como un grupo unido. Ahora podemos correr en el parque, jugar, divertirnos, reír y disfrutar esos pocos años que tenemos para ser solo niños.
Thank you again for the opportunity to testify today, and I'm happy to answer any questions.
Gracias nuevamente por darme la oportunidad de testificar hoy. Estoy encantada de responder cualquier pregunta.
Thank you, Naya and Kamari. I don't see Jane, but I do see Christabel.
Hello, good morning.
Morning.
Good morning, Chairman Mendelson and DC Council members. I am here to support Bill 25-278 to remove the mandate that requires students in the District of Columbia to be vaccinated against COVID-19 to attend school. I ask you to do the same and to focus on what must be our goal: to protect our children. I have 2 children, ages 6 and 12, both who will attend DC Public Schools next school year. As a parent, my job is to look out for my children and to stand up for what is right and true. When the pandemic began in 2020, there was a lot we did not know about the virus, and it was definitely a scary time of uncertainty. I worked hard to keep a level head, to not instill fear in my children, but to always take the perspective of gathering information and doing what was safest for us and our community. When COVID vaccines became available, there were online talks and workshops hosted by our schools, and I attended them with an open mind as well as some questions. In the early months of the emergency rollout, I asked, do these vaccines prevent transmission? And this was repeatedly dismissed and left unanswered. I would be told that the vaccines were safe and effective, with data from clinical trials that were not representative of our community. I was appalled by the narrative focus on everyone receiving a vaccine rather than an emphasis on prevention and treatment. Why were we bombarded by messages that instilled fear instead of empowering individuals and families with information that would improve our health, and not just physically, but emotionally and mentally as well? I think about the Black people in our community who were once again used as subjects in this experimental vaccine, saying that they were one of the most susceptible to the virus, when in fact, what they are most susceptible to is abuse given our cultural history. So much of this experiment has been unjust and unfounded, and it has to stop. We now know that children are at little to no risk for developing complications or dying from COVID, so why would we place a mandate on them to attend school, especially now that they are obsolete and do not provide any beneficial protection from the virus or viral transmission, except for possibly the immunocompromised and elderly. We also know that vaccinated individuals can still transmit the virus and also contract the virus multiple times. So what good, if any, is this vaccine? One of my children and I experienced adverse side effects to vaccines and pharmaceuticals in the past, and so we always make decisions in partnership with our trusted medical doctors. It was never recommended to us that we receive this particular vaccine given our medical history. A mandate would take away our medical freedom as well as confidentiality. My daughter and a few other students faced terrible discrimination last year when they were sent home various times in the middle of the school day if someone tested positive for COVID in their class, just because they were documented as unvaccinated for COVID. These policies were abysmal and provided no protection for medical and health privacy, and they had a humiliating and negative impact on our children for being singled out and treated as if they were a threat and risk to others. That is not the type of environment we want to create in our schools. And even though adverse effects to these vaccines may be labeled rare, they must not be dismissed. They happen. The rise in myocarditis and other chronic health issues alerts us to put our energy and focus into prevention and healthy living instead of requiring every single child to be vaccinated to deserve and earn their right to an education. We must lead by example using the scientific and medical truth that we know now. Removal of this mandate would indeed protect our children, our medical freedom, and the values of our country. Thank you.
Miss Elizabeth
Please.
Mumford.
Hi, I'm Dr. Mumper, a pediatrician with 43 years of experience in pediatrics and 24 years of experience identifying and treating children with vaccine injuries. I oppose giving COVID-19 vaccines to all infants and children. Having carefully studied the risk and benefits way beyond what is on the CDC website, I conclude unequivocally that the risk of harm outweighs any potential benefit at this point in time. Multiple sources of scientifically sound data support my position. Most children, about 95%, have already had COVID-19. Natural immunity is more protective than vaccine-induced immunity, which is narrow and wanes in a few months. The original trials never demonstrated that the injections would stop transmission. So the children in my practice who asked me, since I have COVID-19, will I kill my granny, were cruelly and unnecessarily traumatized. People who receive COVID-19 injections are now more likely than the unvaccinated to get COVID-19 illness. Multiple public health sources in Australia, Denmark, the UK, and the US demonstrate this negative efficacy. Excess mortality data from insurance claims in the United States show an appalling increase of 400% more deaths in young working people 18 to 45 years old during the rollout of the vaccines, far more during COVID-19 itself. In Israel, which had a countrywide early rollout of the Pfizer jab, the Central Bureau of Statistics showed a 22% increase in overall mortality in Israel during January and February of 2021 at the peak of the rollout. 26% of all their cardiac events occurred in young people. There was a high correlation between number of vaccines per day and number of deaths. VSafe, a phone app developed by the CDC to track adverse events after COVID-19 injections, were used by about 10 million people. A stunning 7.7% of users reported having to seek urgent care after their jabs. This is many times greater than for any other vaccine I have given in 43 years. Furthermore, the CDC fought to releasing this data for 463 days until compelled by the courts. Furthermore, the CDC claimed it did not have the resources to display the data, even though my colleagues were able to write the program to display a dashboard of effects in one day. A careful analysis of the pediatric trial data, which I have done, shows a shocking number of fundamental flaws. Most concerningly, a patient who developed severe neurologic symptoms within 24 hours of the vaccine and is now paralyzed in a wheelchair with a feeding tube was reported as functional abdominal pain. The studies were underpowered to find bad side effects, and yet one horrific outcome emerged but was not acknowledged. We have no data from the trials that the COVID-19 jabs prevent severe disease or deaths in children. Since the placebo group was offered the injection, we have no long-term data from the trials. Risks of sudden death in children on athletic fields or in bed, heart inflammation, neurologic abnormalities, dysregulation of menses, and mitochondrial impairment are significant. Historically, deaths on athletic fields numbered between 29 and 36 per year. In January 2022 alone, there were 87 professional athlete deaths. I have grave concerns of the side effects, both known and yet to be defined, that may impair future fertility of pediatric patients. Concerning autopsy data from Germany shows significant heart inflammation in people who died unexpectedly within 20 days of a COVID vaccination, with death due to acute arrhythmogenic heart failure. I disagree that COVID vaccines are safe and effective for all children. I fully support in-person education and removing the mandate. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Dr. Bumper. Matt Irwin? Not here. Diane Perlman?
All right. Okay, thank you.
Mhm.
All right. I have a PhD in clinical psychology with a special in psychoneuroimmunology. I researched people who outlived cancer, prognoses, and reversed their disease using detoxification, nutrition, immune boosting, and biological repair. I've studied vaccine safety for 43 years, and I can recognize scientific fraud. So I'm also a political psychologist and studied propaganda, mystification, and psychological manipulation of fear for 50 years. I've reviewed 60 hours of the CDC and FDA advisory committee hearings authorizing shots for children, despite their doubts, flawed studies, suppression of adverse reaction, lack of scientific data, or long-term studies. Did the American Academy of Pediatrics tell you that the bivalent boosters have 2 COVID strains that are now extinct and were not tested on humans, let alone children, but on 8 mice who were killed without autopsies? Do you know what immunobridging is? Last November, 10 of you voted to delay the no shots, no schools mandate to not exclude 23,000 unvaccinated children from school. You still hope to persuade parents labeled as vaccine hesitant rather than vaccine risk aware, legitimately skeptical of medical experimentation informed by historic memory. Truth is coming out about COVID vaccines as it did for tobacco, thalidomide, Vioxx, Paxil, Tamiflu, Oxycontin, and others. Truth can be censored and denied, but it cannot be refuted. No healthy child has died from COVID. Shots do not prevent infection or transmission. Some lots, hot lots, cause cardiac, immunologic, neurologic, reproductive, and hematological harms and death. They have nothing to do with health. They are all risk and no benefit. A 2021 survey of 5 million Americans found that the highest rate of vaccine refusal is among PhDs, followed by those with the least formal education, who are streetwise. After 5 months, many less educated submitted. The PhDs held firm. Why? A massive propaganda campaign targeted Blacks using Black doctors and celebrities like Hank Aaron, who died. They promoted vaccine clinics in Black neighborhoods. PhDs are trained in scientific methods to discern what is true. We conduct original research and develop our own authority and recognize flawed methods, statistical tricks, and fraud. I support the removal of this mandate, but you still promote and allow these dangerous, unnecessary shots. The Nuremberg Code requires fully informed consent for medical experiments. Children are not capable of informed consent. Most parents, sadly, delegate their sacred responsibility to you. This puts you in a compromising moral position of responsibility and guilt for potential harms that parents will bear. It is not appropriate for you to carry this responsibility. Parents should be as diligent in researching what they inject into their children's bloodstreams as they are in buying a car. This should not be on you. The best protection against any virus is a strong immune system. No healthy child has died from COVID, nor from measles. These shots are contraindicated for all children. Recommendations: follow the lead of several countries that halted COVID shots for children under 19. Offer blanket medical exemption for all children, since doctors are afraid to because they're threatened. Require parents to be responsible for fully informed consent before injecting their children. It should not be on you. Instead of pop-up vaccine clinics and PCR screenings, screen for vitamin D levels conclusively associated with recovery and other measures of metabolic health. Feed children's brains, nourish their bodies, provide healthy school lunches without sugary drinks and chemicals like glyphosate that alter their immune system. Grow vegetable gardens on rooftops where possible. To be truly informed, listen to independent experts with no financial conflicts of interest, including naturopathic physicians like Dr. Mumford and who have successful protocols and who have helped their patients recover and kept them out of the hospital. And I'm happy to provide you with experts.
Thank you, Dr. Perlman. Rachel? Hi, Rachel.
Hi, good morning, Chairperson Henderson and members of the committee. My name is Rachel Johnston. I'm a Ward 5 resident and the Senior Director of Operations and School Support at the DC Charter School Alliance, the local nonprofit dedicated to ensuring all students in DC receive the great public education they deserve. I want to begin by thanking the Children's School Services team and Dr. Boudreau for being collaborative partners with charter schools. We're also grateful to DC Health for sharing a 2-pager that outlines the roles and responsibilities, providing greater clarity around what schools can ask nurses to do. I'm here today to share our appreciation for the effort we're seeing to address nurse shortages in our schools and the commitment to provide 40 hours of Health Suite coverage as a part of the new proposed school nursing program model. My testimony today will focus on a few key recommendations we believe can strengthen the new staffing model. Before I dig into those recommendations, I want to share our support for the School Student Vaccination Amendment Act of 2023. Charter schools continue encouraging parents to vaccinate their children against COVID. However, we are in a different place now with the pandemic. The district ended the public health emergency and is no longer, sorry about that, and is no longer under.
Rachel, come back. Rachel? Rachel, if you can still hear me, you might need to log off and log back on.
While she's doing that, I'd like to clarify that.
Oh,
I'm a
I'm sorry.
medical
Hold on.
doctor.
She's back. She's back, Doctor. Right.
I am so sorry. I have no idea what happened there. I'm not sure where you lost me either. So I'll just
Start over. That's fine.
Can I start over? Is that okay?
Yes, ma'am. Go
Okay.
ahead. Mhm.
I am so sorry about that. Good morning, Chairperson Henderson and members of the committee. My name is Rachel Johnston. I'm a Ward 5 resident and the Senior Director of Operations and School Support at the DC Charter School Alliance, the local nonprofit dedicated to ensuring all students in DC receive the great public education they deserve. I want to begin by thanking the Children's School Services team and Dr. Boudreau for being a collaborative partner with charter schools. We're also grateful to DC Health for sharing a 2-pager that outlines roles and responsibilities, providing greater clarity around what schools can ask nurses to do. I'm here today to share our appreciation for the effort we're seeing to address nurse shortages in our schools and the commitment to provide 40 hours of Health Suite coverage as a part of the new proposed school nursing program model. My testimony today will focus on a few key recommendations we believe can strengthen the new staffing model. Before I dig into those recommendations, I want to share our support for the School Student Vaccination Amendment Act of 2023. Charter schools continue encouraging parents to vaccinate their children against COVID. However, we are in a different place now with the pandemic. The district ended the public health emergency and is no longer undertaking a citywide effort to promote these vaccines. Keeping this vaccine requirement means more students will be subject to exclusion from school, which hinders academic recovery and cuts their access to important wraparound services, including after-school programming, meals, and mental health support. I'll focus the rest of my testimony on the new school nurse staffing model. As we've previously testified, the vast majority of charter schools lack full-time coverage from the nursing program, and many have no coverage at all. The severe shortage of nurses in charter schools impacts the health and well-being of students and school communities. That's why However, we want to share a few key recommendations that we believe this new proposal hasn't yet been widely circulated and discussed with charter school leaders. But our understanding is that leaders who were unable to attend have not yet received the materials. Second, it's important all students receive the care they need in all circumstances, so training and process design is key. We understand this model is structured so schools will have full-time nursing coverage from the same staff. We're grateful for that consideration. However, to provide that full-time coverage and continuity of care uses a team-based approach that will rely on nurse techs to fill in the gaps when an RN or LPN is suite will have telehealth equipment, so health techs can easily and immediately call an RN if they need help. We appreciate the creativity of the solution. However, we want to ensure that these health techs are properly trained for this role and that roles and responsibilities of both health techs and nurses are fully detailed and communicated with schools before the staffing model is implemented. That also includes detailing a series of processes and steps health techs will take if they cannot meet a student's need. Third, we seek transparency with how staff are assigned to health suites. For example, how will it be decided which clusters receive additional staff or which schools in the cluster receive the nurses versus health techs? We understand high-risk needs are a factor, but it would be helpful for schools to get clarity on what this means. Finally, as schools will no longer have PCTs provided by OSCE, we want to ensure they have the support they need to implement No Shots, No School and help students get into compliance this upcoming school year. Schools are relying on their nurses to fill this gap. As always, the health and safety of charter school students is a top priority. The DC Alliance is grateful for our partnership with the city and welcomes the opportunity to continue collaborating to ensure every student has their health needs met so that they can actively and safely engage in learning. Thank you for your time and attention, and I welcome your questions.
Thank you, Ms. Johnson, and appreciate everyone who shared their opinion. Ms. Johnson, I actually want to follow up with a couple of questions for you, in particular about the school nurse situation. Our understanding was that, I got it. Okay, hold on one second. Sorry, Ms. Helwell, I now see you. Apologies if you want to testify. Are you still with us? You're on mute, ma'am.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, thank you. Thank you so much. I'm Jane Hellewell. I've lived in DC for 27 years. I'm a mother of 2 children, 17 and 19 years of age. They both have gone through DCPS education system since pre-K. My youngest is still in high school. Regarding the bill 25278, I support the decision to remove the requirement that DC students receive the COVID vaccine. Refer to my written testimony for details regarding the high number of injuries and deaths caused by the COVID vaccine. And yet, DC is the only current state level jurisdiction that requires students to receive this vaccine. In addition, during the pandemic, unlawful bills amendments were put in place that still remain. Collectively, these legislative decisions make it easier for minors to receive vaccines without parental consent, while making it more difficult for those parents who seek a religious exemption to do so. I shall explain 2 situations. First, the Minor Consent Act of 2020 was passed by the DC City Council in March 2021. This bill allowed 11 to 18-year-old children to be vaccinated without parental consent, taking away parents' rights and duty to make informed vaccine decisions. Records would be concealed from the parents. Those who administer the medical procedure would not be liable for any injuries or death that may be caused by the vaccine. Shortly after this bill was passed into law, CDC recommended that children receive the COVID vaccine despite not going through proper testing. Incentives such as donuts, earpods, college scholarships were given to children in DC who got the vaccine. The environment became conducive to intense pressure for a child to get vaccinated without parents' consent. The judge ordered a temporary injunction
The city did not repeal it. Instead, City Council passed another bill that was equally misleading, stating that if a child seeks a vaccine, the healthcare provider will attempt to call, email, or contact the parent. This is not informed consent. This is not parental consent. Presently, this law exists. I have a the second one is I have a sincerely held religious belief that prevents me from allowing my children to be vaccinated. I have signed religious exemption forms opposing vaccines since 2005. The procedure was never complicated nor an issue. I filled the form out and handed it to the school nurse. I was never asked to explain my beliefs. My decision was always respected and accepted without question. This was my experience for 16 years until 2021. When the DC Act 280 was put in place, the exemption form was changed, as well as the procedure. It was confusing, intimidating, inaccurate, and unlawful. The form includes a long list of diseases and their risks, always ending in possible death, yet no informed risk of each vaccine is included. The parent is instructed to initial and date each vaccine to which they object, acknowledging that they are putting their child in danger. The wording alludes to parents being negligent, so far from the truth. Also, directions ask for proof of religious belief and a letter from a pastor, spiritual leader as support. These are only suggestions. The parent is not obligated to answer these questions. Last year, my solution was to cross out much of the form and rewrite it to align with my sincerely held religious belief. This year, I communicated the fallacies of the form to the head of immunization DOH. After being told that it's not their priority to change the form, I submitted the original form. I was told that this will suffice. In addition, anyone can use the original form. DOH will not refuse any religious exemption, and parents can take the form to the school nurse. The DOH has yet to update their website. In conclusion, throughout my professional and personal life, I have been a strong advocate for safety and health of children. The City Council and DOH strive to keep DC children safe and healthy as well. I find common ground in these goals. I support removing the COVID vaccine requirement so that children may attend school. It is imperative that this bill be passed well before the beginning 2023-24 school year. It is also important. I'm just a second. This is important. It is also important that DOH change the religious exemption form and procedure to its original state. Resist pharmaceutical lobbyists.
Thank you so much for your testimony.
Creating bills and voting.
Thank you. Ms. Johnson, I want to ask some questions in terms of the school nurse policy procedure. So my understanding is that DC Health has sort of been going on a bit of a road show and talking with LEAs around what's going to happen in the upcoming year. Has KIP been a part of those conversations? Sorry, the charter schools been a part of those conversations?
I am so sorry, Councilmember Henderson. Can you repeat the question? My internet seems to be going in and out. Do you mind? I assume that was directed at me since it had charter schools in it.
Yes, it was directed towards you. My question was around, my understanding from DC Health is that they've been going on a bit of a roadshow explaining the new model. And I want to make sure that charter schools have been a part of that conversation. I can also ask Mr. Ramani, who's coming up from KIP, but I'm curious.
Yeah. Yes, good question. So they hosted a session in May, and the schools that were able to attend, they asked schools to volunteer to host children to speak with their school staff and their community. And I do know that there are several charter schools that have volunteered to host throughout the summer. And we're very appreciative of that. I think it's a great effort that Children's is making to try to connect with the community. I think the challenge that we face here is the schools that were unable to attend that session have not yet received either the materials or the recording from the session. So I think they have a little bit less of an understanding about what to expect from this program.
Okay, we could definitely follow up with both Children's and DC Health in terms of what the communication is going to be, because my understanding is some of the impetus was hearing from LEAs around concerns of having a lot of temporary nurses, confusion in terms of standards and those kinds of things. And so we'll definitely follow up on that front. I don't have any further questions for this panel. Thank you so much for your testimony. We're going to move on to the next panel of witnesses.
Thank you.
While the transition is occurring, I just want to state for the record again, more than 672 million doses of the COVID-19 vaccine have been given in the United States from December 14th, 2020 until March 1st of 2023. COVID-19 vaccines are safe and effective. COVID-19 vaccines were evaluated in tens of thousands of participants in clinical trials. The vaccine met the FDA's rigorous scientific standard for safety, effectiveness, and manufacturing quality needed to support emergency use authorization. And like I said at the beginning, I will reiterate that as many times as possible. We allow folks to speak their minds, but we're not going to do misinformation unchecked at this hearing today. Okay. Kathy Boland, Charles Romney, Rolf Hazelhurst, apologies if I'm saying your name incorrectly, William Gallagher, Jen Spear, Anthony Radovic, and Ayo Kiminathi. And Elizabeth Stanford. Okay, Ms. Boland.
Good morning. My name is Kathy Boland. I live in Ward 4. I've been here in DC for 30 years. I support Bill 25278.
Ms. Boland, you are you're coming in and out. Do you want to try to turn off your video, and that might help with your sound?
Okay. How's that?
Yep, go ahead.
Hello? So I said it again. I support Bill 25278 to remove the requirement that students in the District of Columbia are vaccinated against COVID-19 to attend school. My reasons are the COVID vaccines are very dangerous. According to VAERS, U.S. government database that tracks vaccine reactions, a total of 2,484,334 adverse reactions and 35,347 deaths have followed the COVID-19 vaccine. That's through June 2nd, 2023. Among the adverse reactions are Bell's palsy, miscarriage, heart attacks, myocarditis, permanent disability, severe allergic reaction, and shingles. According to Dr. Malone, developer of the mRNA vaccine, in quotes, the current mRNA vaccines have by far highest rates of associated complications of any vaccine product in history, close quotes. All the COVID vaccines were designed to deliver toxic spike protein to the body. A Stanford University study demonstrates the average vaccinated individual gets a larger dose from the vaccine than the average COVID-19 patient gets from the virus. According to Dr. Malone, there are studies on the toxicity of coronavirus spike protein going back to 1992. And according to Dr. Ryan Cole, the toxic spike protein goes to the heart, the brain, the reproductive organs, and all the most sensitive areas of the body where it causes inflammation and autoimmunity. In June of 2021, the FDA reported that the COVID vaccines cause myocarditis. A study from Hong Kong showed that 1 out of every 2,712 to 17-year-old boys were diagnosed with myocarditis following the second dose of Pfizer's Comirnaty vaccine. A study from Kaiser found the same myocarditis. In the original Pfizer vaccine trial, the results showed that you were more likely to suffer serious adverse reactions from the vaccine than to be hospitalized from COVID virus. I'd like to ask for more time because I lost a few seconds there in our clarification. The Pfizer vaccine was approved December 10th, 2020. Pfizer knew there were 1,223 deaths worldwide when their product was released. The number of deaths should have stopped the COVID vaccine program immediately, just as the 25 deaths and cases of Guillain-Barré syndrome stopped the swine flu vaccine program in 1976. Over 1/3 of all children are estimated to have natural immunity to COVID, according to the CDC's own data. There is no ethical justification for superfluous vaccination that will put children at risk. According to cardiologist Dr. Seema Hortra, a child or adult would be 3 times more likely to suffer serious adverse reaction if vaccinated after having the COVID virus and developing immunity. Children are uniquely suited to handle COVID-19 with a survival rate of 99.995%. There's no statistically valid evidence that these vaccines stop, you've heard that, stop transmission or prevent severe disease or deaths in children. Vaccine manufacturers are immune from liability. Why should we trust them to
Ms.
make
Boland.
safe vaccines? Yeah, I have 3 more sentences. That's it. COVID vaccines. Please vote yes on this bill. Give serious consideration to
Ms. Boland, I
Dr.
gave you more time.
In order to, all right, in order to prevent future harm, all these COVID vaccines need to be withdrawn from the market.
Great.
That needs
Thank
to
you.
happen. Vaccine mandates should be dropped. Thank you.
Thank you. All right.
Thank you.
Mr. Romani, thank you for your patience.
Good morning, Chairman Mendelson and members of the council. My name is Charles Romani, and I'm the Associate Director of Health Services at KIT DC. Thank you for holding this hearing today. We appreciate the administration's creative approach to increasing nursing services and simplifying the district's immunization policies. I'm here to share suggestions that will help KIT DC students stay healthy and continue to access their schooling. The national nursing shortage continues to significantly impact staffing at our schools. However, we appreciate the efforts made by the Department of Health and their nursing contractor, Children's National Medical Center, to expand nursing coverage over the past year. We thank them for promoting transparency and understanding by disseminating their nurse job responsibilities. In transitioning to the new nursing model, we suggest that DOH and Children's prioritize the following. Number 1 is staffing equitably and consistently. The model guarantees at least 1 full-time nurse or health technician at each of the district's public and public charter schools. Fulfilling that guarantee would go a long way towards meeting student health needs, but can only be accomplished if there are a sufficient number of health professionals to fill the position. Has there been an assessment of the availability of trained and credentialed health technicians? What happens if we aren't able to fill all the positions? Those are questions that we would need answered. And point number 2 is to create and disseminate detailed nurse and health technician responsibility descriptions. This document should be created with input from school leaders and shared publicly before implementing the new staffing model. As described above, detailed documents allow school leaders to understand expectations and help children to hold health professionals accountable. In presenting the new model, review of immunization records was listed as a responsibility for health technicians. We agree that support with immunization compliance is a key function, but would like more detail in writing. Does this include contacting parents, entering data? How often should these reviews occur, et cetera? Today, the council is considering changes to the student immunization policy. We believe in keeping our schools safe and healthy, but also that all students deserve access to an uninterrupted education. Considering potential equity issues and the evolving approach to COVID-19 being led by respected health authorities, KIT DC supports legislation removing COVID-19 as a required student immunization. We also support changes to school immunization enforcement that targets efforts on specific grade levels and sets exclusion dates well beyond the enrollment audit. This will simplify the data tracking process and allow us to pool efforts towards preventative immunization access rather than reactive exclusion from school. We do want to continue our call to amend immunization requirements to only include those which prevent the spread of disease at school. The HPV vaccine should no longer be used as grounds for exclusion for important school time, as it is not a reasonable threat to the safety of other students. We look forward to continued collaboration with the council and administration on the establishment of an improved school health model and a more efficient student immunization program. Thank you for holding today's hearing. I look forward to any questions that you may have.
Thank you. Mr. Hazelharth? Mr. Hazelharth, I can see you. If you're speaking, you're on mute. Okay, maybe stepped away. We'll come back. Mr. Gallagher?
Hello, thank you. My name is William Gallagher. I'm a 52-year-old man with a wife and 3 children. We have major life-threatening allergies, vaccine injury, and vaccine complications within my family. One member of my family had a major event and needed life-saving measures as they fainted and had major heart irregularities and breathing issues within 15 seconds of receiving a vaccination. Vaccines, just like all medications, have risks, potential and real side effects, and can cause injury and even death in some. Some people have allergies to ingredients in vaccines. Some of them, like members in my family, don't know this until they get vaccinated. If we discovered a disease and needed peanut proteins to make the vaccine and mandated that vaccine, people would die because some people are allergic to peanuts. For this reason, mandates are not smart science. We don't know what we don't know. Make no mistake, vaccines work and have a space in our healthcare system. However, mandating vaccines, especially COVID vaccines, which are still emergency use, is not smart medicine. Mandating vaccine means that people will be harmed. It's a small percentage, but we owe those people the right to make their own decisions with regard to the vaccine. The science is quite clear with the COVID vaccine. Children with no comorbidity risk have a very small chance of becoming sick from COVID. So the risk-benefit analysis that is outlining mandates for children is not smart science. Now we are seeing an uptick in childhood heart irregularity, myocarditis, pericarditis, and other minor and major issues, all of which are known side effects of the vaccine. The DC Council and DC Health have been working to allow minors to receive vaccines without parental consent. Medicine and vaccine administration should be the decision of the parent and their doctor. Children under 18 also should not be allowed to make medical decisions since they most likely don't understand or have access to their medical history and issues with the medicine. They are also not being informed of the potential risks and side effects. Even if they were, they would most likely not understand those risks and the side effects and how they could be affected. I support Bill 25278, which would remove the requirement that eligible students in the District of Columbia receive a vaccination against COVID-19. The DC Council should expedite the approval and implementation of this bill so parents won't unnecessarily have their children receive the COVID-19 vaccine. I believe parents have the right to choose what medical procedures their children receive, just like I believe every human should have medical autonomy and every woman should have the right to choose medical procedures like abortion. I also oppose the new religious exemption forms, which require parents to initial they are putting their children at risk by not getting them vaccinated. This is absolutely absurd considering parents in the US population as a whole have not been informed of the risks of vaccination. Again, this is an experimental technology with no long-term studies on safety, no medicine interaction studies, and the vaccine available in the US is still emergency use. Emergency use means people take this at their own risk. The version of the vaccine that was approved is called Comirnaty, and that vaccine is still not available in the US. The fact that this is still emergency use, pharmaceutical manufacturers have recorded record profits, and yet there is no money being put aside for vaccine injured families or vaccine injury studies is not acceptable. After vaccines caused major injury in the 1980s, the pharmaceutical companies lobbied Congress and the president to pass the National Childhood Vaccine Injury Act of 1986. This law gave immunity from lawsuits and liability to all vaccine manufacturers. They said in that vaccines are unavoidably unsafe. If you are to mandate a vaccine, then you should be responsible for all injury. all deaths, and all compensation for injury. With COVID, the VAERS system was set aside for a new system of injury and compensation. This system is run by Health and Human Services, and it's set up to make it very hard to get compensated. In conclusion, I do not support mandates. I do support changing the laws so that liability rests with the manufacturer of the vaccine and injuries and properly compensated. I do hope this community makes a rational decision today to save lives and allow parents to continue to make their own medical decisions and their family and their doctor. Thank you for the time to speak today.
Thank you, Mr. Gallagher. Jen Spear is not here. Anthony Radovic. Here. Ayo Kamathi.
Yes, thank you for this opportunity to speak to the council. The first thing I want to say is I do support this bill, 25-278. On August 23rd, 2022, I sent an email to the entire DC City Council, along with the mayor. And at that time, I indicated, one, the information, and I put links there so all of you have it, of what the people have mentioned about the VAERS system. It is the most dangerous thing being presented as medication and medicine in the history of this country. In 1 year, more reported deaths from this official system occurred from these 3 injections, Moderna, Pfizer, and Johnson & Johnson, than in 31 years, all actual vaccines combined, making it the most dangerous thing being presented as medicine. It is not medicine, it's technology, mRNA technology. I want to read, I also sent in the official listing of the 1,291, over 1,200 listed side effects officially as of April 2021 from Pfizer. These are what they knew before the injections were mandated. And I sent those to the entire council and to the mayor. So I'm glad that you're beginning the process of backing away from these. I don't think it's enough. I'm going to read part of what I sent. I am writing to inform you that in my estimation, everyone who voted for this bill is an active, knowing participant in a genocide against children in the United States of America, specifically Washington, D.C. This communication provides current evidence of why these injections are harmful and demonstrates your knowledge of the danger of these injections. The fact that you are intentionally and willfully circumventing the court's ruling to inject children without their parents' knowledge or consent represents your intent to do harm. From the date of this communication on August 23rd, 2022, I believe that any child who is harmed due to your advocating and or facilitating COVID-19 injections called vaccinations to them is a victim of an active genocide perpetuated by you and all of the members of the DC City Council who voted for this bill. I request that you employ the same urgency you used in circumventing the U.S. District Court's injunction against the Minor Consent for Vaccination Act of 2020 in ending this genocidal assault on the children of Washington, D.C. Otherwise, you may soon be pursued for crimes against humanity for actively engaging in a genocide against the children in the Washington, D.C. metropolitan area. So it is not enough to stop the mandates of the injections. Now that you have the information, you are now responsible with your knowledge to share that information with the public in Washington, D.C. I also want to bring to the attention of everyone out there this document. Can't see it here too well, but I'm going to read and tell you where you can find it. It's called ISSN 277-5906, COVID-19 and illegal U.S. bioweapons activity and insiders revelations. J. Bart Klassen, MD. You're talking about you want to give people the science. He is a scientist who worked with Dr. Fauci. Again, ISSN 2771-5906. Thank you.
Ms. Stanford.
Thank you, Chairman Mendelson and Councilmember Henderson, for your hard work and dedication to the health and well-being of the citizens of the District of Columbia. Having just finished teaching in the district, I'm grateful to see the work you have invested in Bill 25-278, which would remove the requirement for students in the district to be vaccinated as a prerequisite for school attendance. And I want to commend you on your heart and your labor. Councilmember Henderson, thank you for your commitment to robust school attendance and your awareness that the transmission rates have been low for months. I think many were unaware that COVID-19 vaccines were emergency use authorized to begin with, and by law should not have been mandated. With strong natural immunity, children are at a very low risk of adverse effects if they even contract COVID-19. The Mayo Clinic's definition for children who contract COVID-19 is evidence of a, quote, mild illness, end quote. Unfortunately, recent studies have shown evidence of serious side effects from the COVID-19 vaccine, primarily an increase in myocarditis. According to VAERS, Vaccine Adverse Event Reporting System, people under age 25 comprised only 8.8% of second doses received, but were 52.5% of myocarditis incidents reported, making them 6 times as likely to develop myocarditis than the aggregate group. Historically, VAERS reflects only 1% of actual adverse vaccine events. The UK noted that for some products and some doses, myocarditis post-vax exceeded myocarditis post-illness in adolescent boys. The findings related to the connection between the COVID-19 vaccine and myocarditis are statistically significant. Another notable concern about the vaccines is that there are dozens of sites around the world where the vaccines are being manufactured and none are FDA inspected. Clearly, these considerations pose a grave risk. As has been discussed, the vaccine has not been shown to prevent transmission or infection, and as the virus mutates, the vaccines cannot keep pace to remain effective. Currently, the only products recommended are the emergency use authorization products, and the national emergency ended on April 10th and expired on May 11th. Essentially, the pandemic is over, making any kind of requirement for students to be vaccinated to attend school null and void. Thank you very much for your time and attention. It is much appreciated.
Thank you. Mr. Hazelhurst, I wanted to give you another opportunity. I see you still on my screen if you wanted to present your testimony. Okay, well, I don't have any questions for these witnesses. Thank you for providing your testimony. If you haven't provided your written testimony, please provide that to the committee for the record. We're going to go on to our next and final public witness panel before we turn to the government witnesses. Just to repeat what I said earlier in case someone is joining us. More than 672 million doses of the COVID-19 vaccine have been given in the United States since December 14th, 2020. Vaccines in general are safe, effective. They've been evaluated in tens of thousands of participants in clinical trials. The vaccines met the FDA's rigorous scientific standards for safety, effectiveness, and manufacturing quality needed to support emergency use authorization. Okay, our final group, Emily Tarsal. Ms. Tarsal, I see you on the screen. There you are.
Okay, thank you. Well, good afternoon, Chairman and committee members. I ask you to please vote to remove the mandate that students in the District of Columbia must be vaccinated COVID-19 to attend school. DC is the only place in the whole country that has such a pending policy. All of America recognizes that this policy is unethical, un-American, and antithetical to true informed consent because it would coerce students into bearing unneeded and unknown risk. The right to informed consent when considering any medical procedure is a fundamental right and a key medical ethic worldwide. The ethic has grown from the Nuremberg trials after World War II and forbids human experimentation, the use of force or intimidation, and the lack of true informed consent for medical procedures, including vaccination. I am Emily Tarcell, licensed clinical mental health therapist, president of Health Choice Maryland, and a mother who experienced the firsthand tragic consequences from a failure to be given truthful information regarding vaccination. My sweet daughter, Christina, died 18 days following her HPV vaccine, a vaccine that we would have declined if we had been given truthful risk-benefit information. This is not anecdotal. The government conceded that she died from the vaccine. Vaccines are major medical interventions that can have serious outcomes, and the former Institute of Medicine has stated that vaccines are unavoidably unsafe. So I'm here today prompted by my personal experience and concern for others to support the right of DC children and families to make informed decisions regarding COVID-19 vaccines based on truthful information without mandates, bribes, or coercion. Consider the following as some of the reasons to oppose mandatory COVID-19 vaccines for school attendance. One, children have robust, competent immune systems, and according to experts, they are an extraordinary low risk of COVID-19 morbidity and mortality. Two, students who have had cases of COVID already possess antibodies that are durable and give them immunity, as well as providing herd immunity that would protect others. Number three, COVID vaccines on the market have caused notable side effects, as has been mentioned, and can result in pathology and even death. This prevents students from attending school. There have been hospital visits and even loss of life. Number four, even though the FDA granted emergency use authorization for the COVID vaccines, they are not FDA approved to treat, cure, or prevent any disease. 5 COVID vaccines were not tested for interaction with other vaccines, medications, or their effect on those medically compromised. 6 manufacturers, doctors, and medical providers have been given liability protection against lawsuits for injuries and death. 7, boards of education should consider whether they might be liable for damages or health outcomes or loss of life due to mandatory COVID-19 vaccine policy. And 8, it has been shown that the vaccine does not prevent transmission of the virus, does not prevent one from getting the virus again. So COVID-19 vaccination is therefore not about public health or the children's physical health, but rather personal choice following true informed consent. Please reverse your decision to mandate experimental COVID-19 vaccines before more students are harmed. Thank you.
Thank you. Aria?
Good morning, Chairman Mendelson and members of the council. My name is Aria Moncrief. I'm grateful for the opportunity to speak with you all. I'm the Director of Operations and COVID-19 Recovery Fellow at DC Preparatory Academy of Schools. DC Prep serves over 2,100 students at our 6 campuses. We're located in wards 5, 7, and 8. In my role, I have overseen a vast majority of initiatives related to children's health throughout the 22-23 school year. I am in charge of all initiatives related to ensuring our students get their required immunizations, all COVID-19 mitigation policies and procedures, and have worked closely with our PCTs, operations teams, and nursing teams to solve many of the challenges pertaining to student and community health. I will first begin by addressing the plan to shift to zone coverage or team-based care for school nursing. I fully support this shift as our communities have been greatly impacted by the lack of consistent nursing and care throughout this entire school year. I have witnessed the burden this issue has placed on our nurses and our operations teams, as well as the fear and insecurity it has caused our families and their children, particularly those who are medically fragile. The need to distribute nurses sporadically across the city has resulted in not only lack of care for our children, but a lack of familiarity with the medical professionals serving our community. Families must see our nurses as a part of the school community the same way they see the principal, the teachers, the front office staff. Knowing who is caring for your child is an essential part of ensuring our families feel safe and sending their children to school. The inconsistency of the week we schedule across our network of schools has also caused inequity in access to adequate care for our children. Our Benning campus is in Ward 7 and is co-located, so only one school nurse is serving over 700 children per day. This year, a nurse has only been present at Benning for between 24 to 36 hours per week. Furthermore, the inability to provide the same nurse throughout the year has eroded trust and placed the burden on parents of medically fragile children to ensure their child is receiving care each day. One of our Benning parents recently broke down in tears with me, stating that she didn't feel safe sending her children who have diabetes to school each day because she has no idea who would be caring for her children, let alone if there would be someone qualified to do so. Shifting to team-based care would ensure a consistent and familiar team of medical professionals serve our children. I'll now address the bill 25278. While I personally believe that our communities will be safer and healthier if every child is vaccinated against COVID-19, I also believe that requiring children over 12 to be vaccinated in order to attend school would greatly impact educational access for communities of color in the District of Columbia. DC Prep our student body is 98% students of color. And at the beginning of the 22-23 school year, over 30% of our student body, over 500 children, were not compliant with the no shots, no school mandate. We worked hard to ensure our children got the mandatory vaccines needed to keep them safe, healthy, and in school. But the vaccine with the lowest compliance rate by far was the COVID-19 vaccine for our children over 12. Many of our families were still reluctant to vaccinate their children against the virus, and there wasn't consistent messaging about no shots, no school that would reassure or enforce them complying with the COVID-19 portion of the mandate. Furthermore, we didn't have the ability to input COVID-19 vaccination information into doses, which made it impossible to assess or enforce any mandate that included COVID-19. While many improvements have been made to the data systems housing student medical information this year, there's still no consistency on how information on a child's vaccination status for COVID-19 is entered into the system. While I understand the rationale for including the COVID-19 vaccine in the mandatory immunization list for schools is medically sound, I don't believe it's possible for the mandate to be accurately or equitably enforced and should therefore be removed. Thank you for your time, and I look forward to continuing our partnership with CSS and DOH to ensure our children have a safe and healthy environment every day. I invite any questions.
Thank you so much for your testimony and for being here. Again, if you haven't submitted your written testimony, please provide that to the committee for the record. I don't have any questions for this witnesses, and I don't see any of my colleagues here, so thank you so much. As we transition to the government witnesses, we have 4 seats at the table. They're here in person. Dr. Thomas Farley, who's the Senior Deputy Director of DC Health. Dr. Andrea Boudreau, who's the Executive Director of Children's School Services at Children's National Hospital. Paul Kine, who's the Deputy Mayor for Education, and Tia Brumstead, who's the Assistant Superintendent of Health and Wellness for the Office of the State Superintendent for Education. As they come to the table, it's a little history about vaccines in the United States and their requirements. So in 1855, Massachusetts was the first state to require that children have the smallpox vaccine before going to school to prevent the spread of smallpox in schools. By 1963, 20 states mandated children to have several vaccines before going to school for the first time. And since then, that number has only increased. At this point, all but about 4 US states have vaccine requirements for students entering kindergarten through 12th grade. As I said in my opening statement, in the district, we made a particular call about the COVID-19 vaccine, given the state that we were in as a city at that time with lots of deaths, lots of infections. But I hope at our government witnesses today, we could talk about where things are with all of our pediatric routine immunizations and the mandates that we had, because we know that we got behind during the pandemic in terms of children being vaccinated for polio, measles, mumps, rubella, et cetera. And then on that, also very much interested in hearing the progress around the rollout of the new school nurse model for our public and public charter schools. But before we begin, it's customary that for the government witnesses, we swear you under oath. And I recognize that Dr. Boudreau, you don't work for the government, so you can sit, but if you want to join, that's great. So if everyone can raise their right hand. Do you swear or affirm under penalty of law that the testimony you're about to provide to the Council of the District of Columbia and this committee is the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth? All right, who would like to start? Okay, Dr. Parley.
Good morning, Chairman Mendelson, council members and staff of the Committee of the Whole, and Council Member Henderson. My name is Dr. Thomas Farley, and I'm a pediatrician and the Senior Deputy Director for DC Health's Community Health Administration. On behalf of Mr. Keith Fletcher, Interim Director of DC Health, I'm pleased to offer testimony on DC Health's efforts to promote routine pediatric and COVID-19 immunizations and how we're updating our school health services program to better support our children. Since DC Health last came before the Committee of the Whole to discuss pediatric immunizations in October 22, DC Health and its partners have continued to provide access to and raise awareness for the need for routine pediatric immunizations. Thanks to the work of DC Health staff, grantees, and education partners, we saw significant improvements in immunization rates over the past 12 months. In June of last year, 27% of students in the district were non-compliant with required immunizations. By June of this year, that measure had dropped to 20%. While we still have work to do, we are encouraged by this improvement, and we're making additional changes for the 23-24 school year to build on that momentum. Our immunization registry, the District of Columbia's immunization information system, known as DOSES, is now more robust than ever because it is connected to more healthcare providers in the district, as well as with the immunization registries of Maryland and Virginia. Furthermore, we have enhanced our immunization compliance portal, the access tool that displays the data to in the registry to school-based staff. This portal will be used by school-based staff to easily determine whether a child is compliant with school vaccination requirements, and if not, what vaccines are due. The portal can also generate letters for individual children or groups of children notifying their parents or guardians of the vaccines they're due. In preparation for next school year, DC Health, in partnership with OSSI, has updated our criteria for immunization compliance for school attendance. This revision follows the Federal Advisory Committee on Immunization Practices, which considers a student due for a vaccine as soon as the child reaches an age where a vaccine is recommended, instead of a two-tiered system of due and overdue. This revision will have the initial effect of increasing the total number of children counted as non-compliant, since all children due for the vaccine will be considered non-compliant. However, OSSI, with our support, is planning next year to enforce the immunization compliance requirement only in 4 key grades: pre-K 3, kindergarten, 7th grade, and 11th grade. Together, these changes will simplify and streamline the enforcement of the immunization mandate while reducing the number of children at risk for exclusion from school. As we emerge from the COVID-19 pandemic, our vaccination strategy shifted to one of sustainable, ongoing engagement with partners and community members focused on promoting routine immunizations, ensuring that the public has access to immunization opportunities, and reinforcing trust in vaccine effectiveness. DC Health believes that the best place for children to be vaccinated is at the clinics or offices of their primary medical providers, who know the children's medical history and can answer parents' questions in the context of an established, trusting relationship. DC Health will continue to work with the approximately 50 medical facilities within the district offering routine pediatric immunizations to ensure that they remain available and accessible to all district families. To supplement that, this summer and fall, DC Health will work with partners to host vaccination clinics at schools and community events, as well as offer vaccinations in our 7 school-based health centers. When children are at risk for exclusion from school, we will partner with key providers to make walk-in vaccination opportunities available. The existing district healthcare system has sufficient capacity to vaccinate all students under risk for exclusion, and with our additional appointment and walk-in opportunities, all parents should be able to have their children vaccinated without missing school days. We understand that some council members have asked why school nurses do not offer vaccines in school routinely. While this may appear to be efficient, there are 3 obstacles that make this approach difficult to implement with very little impact. First, there are storage requirements. The requirements for storage of vaccines are costly, involving specialized refrigerators that log temperatures and emit alarms if temperature limits are exceeded. In conjunction is the accompanying need for staff or contractors to be able to access those refrigerators 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, to rescue vaccines that are not held at appropriate temperatures. Second are the federal requirements for provider enrollment, vaccine management, and billing. Organizations offering vaccinations must be enrolled as providers under the federal Vaccines for Children program and must bill for children covered by private insurance to recoup the cost of the vaccines. One of the VFC program's requirements is that providers must keep 2 separate stocks of vaccines, one for privately insured patients and one for publicly insured and uninsured patients. This can lead to wastage of vaccines, which can be expensive. The third obstacle is parental consent. Per federal requirements, parents must provide consent to vaccinate their children at or near the time of vaccination. Obtaining these consents can be time-consuming for staff and often requires that parents come to the school with their children during the school day. While these obstacles do not make it impossible to offer vaccination in schools, they do mean that the number of children vaccinated through such an approach is likely to be small and not justified by the cost of equipment, vaccines, and staff time. In discussions with other immunization programs around the United States, we learned that very few offer routine school-based vaccinations. Those that do tend to be school systems in very rural areas where there are almost no primary care providers offering vaccinations in the community. More commonly, any vaccinations administered in schools are delivered by school-based health centers or by mobile medical providers in one-day vaccination events. These are among the approaches we are already providing in the district. Ensuring trust in vaccinations is the second pillar of ensuring families have their children vaccinated. We will continue to educate families on the efficacy and safety of routine pediatric immunizations through social media, advertising in public areas and at bus stops, and then with our sister agencies such as the Department of Parks and Rec, the DC Public Library. Now, as the council considers the School Student Vaccination Amendment Act of 2023, I want council members to know that immunization against COVID-19 is a vital part of DC Health's ongoing strategy for combating this infection. This virus can be dangerous for children, and the COVID-19 vaccine is extremely safe in children as well as in adults. Unfortunately, widespread misinformation has caused many of our student families to distrust the COVID-19 vaccine or believe that its infection with this virus is trivial. Our data shows that more than 40% of children over the age of 12 in DC public and charter schools have not completed the 2-dose primary series of COVID-19 vaccinations. We believe that parents' resistance would make it very difficult to enforce and mandate a COVID-19 vaccine at this time, especially while COVID-19 vaccination rates or infection rates are so low. I should add that complicating this factor is that it is likely that the Centers for Disease Control will recommend a new updated booster vaccine, which will arrive in probably around September. Recommend that for all children above the age of 5 as well as adults. We will continue our outreach and engagement with students and families and residents on the district on the importance of COVID-19 immunizations. When new boosters became available, we will ensure that residents are aware of the importance of those boosters and the opportunities to obtain them. Finally, I'd like to update the council on some planned changes for our staffing school health suites next school year. Over the years, all healthcare providers in the district have struggled to find enough qualified nurses. A 2022 survey by the National Council of State Boards of Nursing and the National Forum of State Nursing Workforce Centers highlighted that over 200,000 experienced RNs and over 60,000 experienced LPNs left the national workforce between 2020 and 2022. The same survey reported that roughly 20% of the total RN LPN workforce is planned to leave nursing over the next 4 years. By 2030, researchers anticipate there'll be a deficit of nearly 1 million nursing jobs. While the pandemic has accelerated the pace of nurse burnout, this shortage is longstanding. Due to this shortage, for over a decade, the district has struggled to find an adequate number of nurses to provide in-person coverage of school health suites. We've used all the resources at our disposal, including telehealth and staff augmentation contracts. Yet approximately 1/3 of our school health suites do not have full-time in-person nurses. The staffing level is not optimal for students or schools. Therefore, starting this fall, the district will implement a new staffing model using team-based care. In this model, 4 schools in geographic proximity will be staffed by a consistent team of 4 or more professionals, including at least 2 nurses and 2 student health technicians. Each school health suite will have a full-time staff person there 5 days a week, with nurses being prioritized for those schools with the medically fragile students. The new role, student health technician, is an allied health professional that supports nurses in assisting students and meeting administrative needs. They will be trained on first aid, administration of medication, case management, data management, use of the immunization compliance portal, and telehealth equipment and protocols. If a student in any of those 4 schools has medical needs that require expertise of a nurse and on-site service, the supervisory nurse will travel to that school to provide that service. I want to thank the council for hosting DC Health and our education partners to continue to raise the awareness of the importance of immunizations and the role that school health services play to keep our children healthy and be able to succeed in school. And I'm available to answer questions.
Thank you. It says Dr. Boudreau is next, but who?
Good morning, Councilmember Henderson, members of the committee. For the record, I'm Dr. Andrea Boudreau, and I serve as the Executive Director of Children's School Services at Children's National Hospital. Children's National is a school-friendly health system, and we maintain our commitment to improve health outcomes for all students from every ward. Children's National has been committed to the District of Columbia for the entirety of our existence. When the city was seeking an organization to provide school nursing services over 20 years ago, Children's National accepted the call, even when the cost of providing those services exceeded the funding. Even today, Children's National continues to subsidize the school health program with nearly $2 million of in-kind services. However, with the more than $17 million cut in Medicaid reimbursements to Children's National adopted in the most recent fiscal year 24 budget, we must operate this program with the funding provided from the Department of Health. Children's National will submit written testimony on B250278 for the record, but for the purposes of this hearing, I will focus my testimony on the school nursing and proposed care delivery restructure. While the community is most familiar with the school nurses, Children's School Services operates 3 other components of the School Health Services Program grant. The 4 components, in-person health suite services, care coordination, telehealth, and training and technical assistance, are interconnected and critical to our ability to safely implement this new model. The telehealth services we will discuss later are a critical component to ensure every student has access to care. The innovative care coordination we do sets us apart from other jurisdictions across the nation. And through our training team, we maintain best practices in care delivery. As the 22-year partner of the Department of Health, providing school nursing services and care coordination for 90,000 students every day, we recognize the need to do better and align school nursing structure with student health needs. While the COVID-19 pandemic greatly impacted staffing for providers and nurses across the country, this industry has experienced a nursing shortage for nearly a decade. With nurses retiring and incentives for different methods to deliver care, the U.S. Bureau of Labor Statistics reported that this reality will likely continue through 2030. CSS serves 200 schools between DCPS and public charter schools, with only 91 permanent nurses on our staff. To meet the needs of the community, we have heavily relied upon agency staffing, which presents a fiscal challenge for us to maintain. Today, we partner with 4 agencies that bring nurses to Washington, D.C. from across the country. Unfortunately, the culture of travel nursing is not one that aligns with the needs of the children of the District of Columbia. In 2022, we began working on a proposal to present to DC Health that would allow us to reduce our dependency on agency staffing and ensure that we had a more consistent structure across the entire district. And this model that we'll present today just does that. In this model, schools will be grouped into 4 clusters and assigned dedicated staff that include 2 nurses and 2 to 3 health technicians. Instead of a 1-to-1 ratio, there will be a team in place to support student health needs. The nurses in the cluster will be responsible for oversight of care for medically fragile students. The health technicians will support the nurses in documentation, medication administration, first aid, hearing and vision screening, and serve as immunization points of contact for schools. This team of healthcare professionals comprise a dedicated group of individuals who will support the needs of the students in the cluster. This model allows nurses to practice at the top of their license. It will decrease sporadic movement and increase consistency. These issues have been dissatisfiers for both our staff and the community, and with this transition, we'll be able to address them all. This spring, Children's School Services launched a tour to seek community feedback from parents and school leaders about the implementation of the model. During these meetings, parents and principals and other school leaders can ask questions about the model, its impact, and how it would impact their children specifically. One parent shared her concern with the current state and her daily fears of her 2 daughters with type 1 diabetes. This mom, in tears while speaking, shared how she worries when there's not a nurse present. She questioned if the new staff would be present every day to keep her daughter safe. At the conclusion of our meeting, the mom was smiling and expressed comfort with our proposed implementation. She was cautiously optimistic about the model, but shared that she, and I'm gonna paraphrase her, would try it. Our goal on this tour this summer is to meet with parents and school leaders who have raised concern and share how this will actually impact their children. Children's School Services recognizes that this is a shift from the traditional nursing model, but we are committed to ensure that every parent and school leader feels safe and knows our concern about their children. While this is new to the district, this is not new in practice. This model of team-based care works. I've seen it implemented both as a provider and as a business executive across the nation. Earlier, I mentioned the telehealth program. We will have telehealth devices in all schools that participate in the School Health Services program by the start of school year 22-23. This program has given children access to a provider while they remain in school. Parents and caregivers are able to stay at work, and prescriptions, when necessary, are sent to the family's pharmacy of choice. This school year, we have served over 300 children through telemedicine, and 75% of those visits result in the child's ability to return to class. Telehealth services significantly impact chronic absenteeism through the additional access point to providers. With this addition of this new model, the RN on the team will be available to support the technicians in real time. RN to technician telehealth services are not billed, nor do they require consent. It is solely a method by which the nurse and the technician can the nurse can support the technician. A best practice as outlined by the American Academy of Pediatrics and the American College of Emergency Physicians is to ensure the continuum of care between the health system and the community. We work to ensure that we have a continuity of care for children as they return to school. The collaboration between Children's School Services and Children's National better allow us to support this work. We coordinate return to school needs, attend IEP and 504 hearings to ensure that recommended accommodations are in place. This model allows for consistency in school and dedicated persons to attend important meetings. While we do our best to support this work, challenges with reconciling data from multiple health records across the region have been a hindrance to our progress. The current electronic health record used in school does not allow for data sharing between providers and the nurse. Health Suite staff spend a significant portion of time entering information in health records, dental forms, and this has been a dissatisfier for the staff. This model allows for nurses to not focus on the implementation and entering of data, but to focus more on the medical needs of the children. It is important for us to recognize that pediatric health is not limited to the time children are in school. Their needs present in school, their needs that present in school must be addressed, and the children in our community need social support as well. Unfortunately, for so many, the Health Suite is their sole access to a healthcare provider. There have been several instances where the school nurse was able to identify gaps in social needs. The social determinants of healthcare are critical to overall health outcomes, and a consistent presence in the building will improve our ability to monitor and address those needs. Healthcare is local, and we work to support community in and outside of the Health Suite. Children's National partners with the CSS partners with the Children's National Mobile Unit to deliver care in the community. Last year, our Doschella events on Saturday allowed us to continue work of building trust in the community, meeting critical health needs, reducing the likelihood of communicable disease and spread through targeted immunization drives. We connected families to medical homes as well. We administered over 1,400 vaccines during that initiative. This year, we increased our work and partnerships by partnering with Howard University College of Dentistry for pediatric oral health screenings and their faculty plan to provide cardiovascular screenings. The Health Suite staff and care coordination team are critical to the success of these events and overall community population health work that we do. Unfortunately, for so many of our children, the Health Suite is also a safe place where they seek emotional support. Our staff will be certified, all staff will be certified in mental health first aid this summer to ensure they're better able to support the students who come to the Health Suite every day. The increase in gun violence and crime in our communities continues to raise great concern. There's limited outcry when there are shootings in our area, as we have normalized violent crime in the community that has also impacted our youth. A few weeks ago, we experienced 4 shootings, 2 fatal in 1 week. Last year, I shared a story of a former patient who did not believe he would live to see 21. That has stayed with me because the young man was hurting. Our children in our health suites are hurting today. We must ensure they feel safe, cared for, seen, and heard. And this model ensures the consistency and presence for the children in the school. While Children's National is proud to partner with DC Health to staff and implement this school nursing program, we remain committed to caring for the acutely and critically ill patients in our hospital. It is critical that we receive the necessary funding to support the needs of students and families. We are deeply appreciative of the council's approval to restore $2 million in funding for children's school services, but overall funding for the program continues to decrease. While we were able to develop this model with the funding provided to children's school services in fiscal year 23, but this year that funding level was decreased. The ability to successfully continue this work is dependent upon consistent funding and support by the district. To date, we have hired 11 new student health technicians who have started orientation and anticipate an additional 35 next week. We thank you for the opportunity to testify during this hearing. Look forward to ways to work collaboratively. We're happy to answer any questions.
Thank you, Dr. Boudreau. Deputy Mayor.
Good morning and welcome, Chairman Mendelson and Councilmember Henderson, members of the Committee of the Whole, staff, members of the public. My name is Paul Kine, and I am honored to serve as the Deputy Mayor for Education for the District of Columbia. Thank you for the opportunity to testify today on school nurses and Bill 25-0278, the School Student Vaccination Amendment Act of 2023. Thanks to the strong coordination across government agencies and the private and nonprofit sectors, DC is a national leader in access to the COVID-19 vaccine, which we know is critical for keeping our residents safe. We fully support the COVID-19 vaccine and encourage all residents to get their shots and boosters. That being said, the virus has changed significantly, largely as a result of the number of people who have immunity, and thankfully, the virus no longer poses the same level of threat to the well-being of our residents. At the same time, we have seen ongoing hesitancy and misinformation about the COVID-19 vaccine. This has led to unique resistance to the COVID-19 vaccination by parents that we believe would lead to challenges in enforcement, challenges that could spill over into other immunizations, undercutting our success in increasing compliance with routine pediatric immunizations. Finally, we do not want to be alone in the country in requiring the COVID-19 vaccine for students. Given this, we support the permanent removal of the COVID-19 vaccine from the list of routine pediatric immunizations that are required for school attendance. We will continue to work closely alongside DC Health to encourage all students to get their COVID-19 vaccinations and boosters in keeping with national and local public health guidance. On routine pediatric immunizations, at this time, we are dedicating our energy to the enforcement of routine pediatric immunizations. Stepping back, I want to take a minute to recognize how far we have come today compared to where we began when we testified before this body a year ago. At that time, in the face of a global pandemic that shuttered our schools and seriously harmed our communities, our government was preparing to enforce routine pediatric immunizations as a requirement for school attendance for the first time in years. This effort required an unprecedented level of collaboration across government agencies in the health and education clusters and the hard work of dedicated civil servants. This effort included a comprehensive vaccination access campaign by DC Health with multiple vaccination sites in every ward, vaccination clinics and mobile sites geared towards children, youth, and families, extensive outreach by DC Health to families through calls, letters, and a media campaign, regular and robust communication, guidance, training, and technical assistance by OSSI for local education agencies, and significant work by schools to contact students and families and bring them into compliance with the help of additional staff and resources provided by the district. For the first time in years, as a last resort, we temporarily excluded students from school until they came into compliance with their required vaccinations. Through these comprehensive efforts, we reduced the noncompliance rate for routine pediatric immunizations substantially, with over 6,000 fewer noncompliant students. Our schools and our students are significantly safer as a result of this work. And the bulk of the lift to move towards compliance with required school immunizations has been completed, making the hard work ahead much easier for our schools and families. We have closely studied our experiences during the past year of enforcement, and moving forward, we will incorporate the lessons learned in our vaccine access and enforcement strategies. My colleagues from OSSI and DC Health have gone and will go into more depth on the proposals, but I will touch on a few. First, we are proposing to streamline the temporary exclusion process to focus on 4 key grades that correspond to age bands after which vaccines are routinely recommended: pre-K 3, kindergarten, 7th and 11th grades. This will result in a single district-wide notification and exclusion date, regardless of school or sector, to make the process easier for families. We hope the council will support this approach. In addition, we will provide targeted outreach, technical assistance, and support for schools with high noncompliance, and we will hold them accountable if improvements are not made. We will continue our school-driven communications campaign around immunizations with a focus on the summer and back-to-school periods. And we will maintain broad access through a range of vaccination sites, including, but not limited to, school-based health centers, healthcare providers, mobile clinics, and Safeway. And finally, we are making important improvements to the DC Health Immunization Compliance Portal, as Dr. Farley went into, based on feedback from our school communities. The portal will generate with greater ease and simplicity school-level reports and student notifications to reduce the workload for school staff. In closing, I want to again thank the government agencies that have spearheaded the effort to get students immunized against preventable diseases, in particular DC Health, OSSI, our LEAs, and our schools. And I want to thank this council for its partnership in promoting immunizations and supportive policies, and therefore protecting the health, well-being, and safety of our children, youth, and families, and our frontline school-based staff. Thank you, and I look forward to answering any questions.
Thank you, Deputy Mayor. And last but not least, Ms. Brumstead.
Good morning, Chairman Mendelson, Councilmember Henderson, members of the Committee of the Whole, and staff. My name is Tia Marie Brumstead, and I'm the Assistant Superintendent of Health and Wellness for the DC Office of the State Superintendent of Education. Prior to joining OSSI, I served DC students and families as a school social worker and a school wellness director. And I'm pleased to appear before you today at this public hearing on school nurses and Bill 25-278, the School Student Vaccination Amendment Act of 2023. The Office of the State Superintendent of Education supports the physical, mental, social, and emotional health of students and staff by promoting safe, welcoming, healthy, and joyful learning environments. OSSI recognizes that schools play a critical role in promoting health and the safety of youth in the district by helping them establish lifelong healthy behaviors, connecting them to health services, and ensuring they are protected against infectious and vaccine preventable diseases. OSSI's Division of Health and Wellness supports schools by ensuring they have access to training, resources, policies, and supports they need to champion student health. This work is essential because a student's health impacts their readiness to learn. I welcome this opportunity to explain OSSI's role in school nursing and in the enforcement of immunization requirements. OSSI deeply appreciates the vital role that school health suite staff play in promoting and protecting student health within district schools. Health suites are staffed by a combination of registered nurses, licensed practical nurses, and allied health professionals. They provide essential health services, support, and education to students, including by completing health screenings, providing direct care to students, conducting care coordination, and completing health documentation, as well as critical communication with families and health professionals. Many district students also have chronic health conditions such as asthma, diabetes, or allergies, and health suite staff work closely with these students and their families to help manage those illnesses while they are at school. School health suite staff also provide skill checks for school staff that conduct the administration of medication and identify, assess, and monitor students with behavioral health needs. In short, school health suite staff are integral members of the school community whose presence supports the physical, mental, and social emotional health of district students. OSSI works with DC School Health Services Program, which manages the grant with Children's School Services to place nurses and health technicians in approximately 178 district public and public charter schools. OSSI meets regularly with DC School Health Services Program to problem solve and to share information and guidance. And this collaboration promotes consistent messaging and effective communication between educators, health suite staff, and families. Children's Health Suite staff play an important role in implementing the school immunization policy. As immunization points of contact, or IPOCs, as well as members of the school health team, school health suite staff help coordinate immunization compliance by identifying students who are missing immunizations, communicating with families, collecting immunization documentation, and inputting those records into the district's immunization system. Health suite staff have also supported families in finding access to care and providing essential health information to families about the importance of immunizations. Through this work, school health suite staff have helped improve our district's school immunization rate. OSSI recently met with DC Health and Children's leadership to learn about the updated health suite staffing model that will be employed next school year. OSSI supports these plans, which align to the whole school, whole community, whole child model, the CDC's framework for addressing health in schools. The whole child model is student-centered and emphasizes the role of the community in supporting the school, the connections between health and academic achievement, the importance of evidence-based school policies and practices. Children's updated staffing model will allow for a team-based approach to support student and student health, provide students with the level of care they need, and ensure more consistent coverage across schools. With regard to the COVID-19 vaccine requirement, I want to begin by expressing OSSI's gratitude to our colleagues at DC Health, whose efforts during the pandemic saved lives and preserved the health of students, families, and school staff. Thanks to the close partnership between the health and education sectors, schools were able to reopen and stay open, allowing students to receive instruction, have access to nutritious meals, and receive necessary community and health services. DC Health and OSSI moved quickly to prioritize school and childcare staff with early access to the COVID-19 vaccine at mass vaccination sites. And when the vaccine became readily available for school-age populations, our agencies worked together with school leaders and healthcare partners to stand up vaccine clinics in schools and communities, enabling thousands of district residents to receive the COVID-19 vaccine. Additionally, beginning in January 2022, OSSI and DC Health collaborated to distribute 3 million rapid antigen test kits to schools. This work, coupled with OSSI and DC Health's technical assistance, guidance, and training, kept district students and staff healthy, our school doors open during some of the most critical points of the pandemic. During the 2021-22 and 2022 school years, OSSI and DCPS, with the support of DC Health, placed patient care technicians in all public and public charter schools in the district. The PCTs, as well as the supervising registered nurses and OSSI's clinical supports program, assisted schools on COVID-19 response and immunization compliance by making many phone calls to families, collecting documents, supporting school-based immunization clinics, and completing other duties as needed. This temporary program provided critical health service supports to schools during the COVID-19 pandemic and the first year of the implementation of the immunization attendance policy. We are now positioned to transition to pre-pandemic operations and regular programs that mirror national practices. Turning our plans for implementing the school immunization policy in school year 2023-24, OSSI and DC Health have identified a number of lessons learned from our experience during the current year that we are using as the basis to propose regulatory and policy changes to streamline and simplify the current process. As you heard from Dr. Farley, the definition of compliance has been simplified, and only 4 grade levels will be subject to the temporary exclusion provision next school year. In addition, all schools will have 2 immunization points of contact, or IPOCs, which will ensure coverage if one of those IPOCs is out of the office, as well as provide all schools with adequate administrative support to implement the policy successfully. Finally, we are instituting a single district-wide calendar that all schools will follow in order to avoid some of the confusion that occurred this year around deadlines and ensure that all schools can successfully implement the policy. After the July 4th holiday, OSSI and DC Health will be launching an outreach campaign to families, including a media toolkit that schools can use this summer to inform families about the importance of immunizations and where they can go for their child's vaccines. Towards the end of the summer, we will distribute a start of school media toolkit that reminds families that all students are required to be in compliance and that students in grades pre-K 3, K, kindergarten 7th and 11th will be subject to temporary exclusion if they do not come into compliance. OSSI is grateful to the many agencies, community partners, educators, and health suite staff who promote school health in the district. OSSI and DC Health continue to work together to address school health needs, and we remain committed and optimistic in our post-pandemic recovery and for the 2023-24 school year. Thank you for this opportunity to testify, and I'm happy to answer any questions.
Thank you. And thank you to all of the government witnesses. As was mentioned, we've been joined by Chairman Mendelson. Mr. Chairman, do you have an opening statement or do you just want to incorporate that into questions? Okay, great. We'll do 10-minute rounds. Wonderful. Okay. Thank you so much to the witnesses and for bearing through the public witness testimony, which included some misinformation and things like that. I know that for all of us in district government, we have the best interests at heart of our young people. And so we appreciate the work that you all have done each and every day, and especially over the last few years. So I just want to ask a couple of follow-up questions to some of the testimony that has been offered. Dr. Farley, you mentioned that as of June of this year, we still are at 20% non-compliant in terms of vaccinations. That was for all of the pediatric vaccinations?
That was for routine pediatric immunizations under the old definition.
Okay, so what's the one that we're having the most trouble with? Is there one?
There isn't one. It is there are many different vaccines that children need to get in order to be compliant, and the fact that there are so many vaccines does complicate that. And so it is really all vaccines. Children not getting every one of those vaccines that makes them non-compliant.
Okay, is there a age band that we are struggling with more than others? Say high school students or middle school students versus?
There are a greater percentage of children who are not compliant in middle and high school than there are in kindergarten. Kindergarten and pre-K are particularly important because we want to make sure that children have the primary series, which reduces their risk of measles, which is an outbreak that I particularly worry about.
Right. I share that concern, especially what we've seen happen in some other jurisdictions where there have been measles outbreaks, which we haven't seen for quite a long time. Ms. Brumstead, you mentioned this. So the proposal from OSSI is to enforce pre-K 3, kindergarten, 7th and 11th grade. Are we concerned that going from kindergarten to 7th could truly put a young person behind if we're not questioning, 6 years of, or I guess a better question is, how do we choose these particular points? Obviously, pre-K 3 is an entry point to school, so that makes sense. Kindergarten is the first grade, which we have mandated, like your kid has to go at age 5, but how do we pick 7th and 11th?
And I'll take that. So vaccines are recommended to be given in different age bands. There are some recommended age 0 to 2, some age 4 to 6, some 11 to 12, et cetera. So these grades were chosen because they occur roughly a year after children enter those different age bands. So we would get children, if they are brought into compliance in those grades, they get them to be compliant with the vaccines due just before then, while also giving parents just enough time to get into the pediatrician's office and get those vaccines. And then if they do come into compliance, then they're fine until they hit the next age band. So it's a way of taking this very large task we have ahead of us and taking it pieces at a time while also focusing on the children at the most important ages.
You're a pediatrician, so is there any concern if I get the first dose in my series at age 4, but I don't finish the series till age 7? Like, does it impact the efficacy of the vaccine by having those large pieces? Now, obviously, we're going to rely on our pediatricians' offices to when those kids come in, because they're still going to have to do the well child visits, et cetera. to say like, you're behind, but does this impact the health or the efficacy of the vaccine by having these large gaps?
So yeah, in general, no. So, a second vaccine and a pair of vaccines is sort of a booster on the first, and generally you can boost even after a longer period of time than is recommended safely. There is a risk though that the child has not gotten that during that period of time. We certainly want children to get their vaccines on schedule. We have other tools to get children vaccinated besides school exclusion. We're working with pediatricians simultaneously, for example, to do recalls of children who are behind. And so having that gap is not ideal, but it's not particularly risky.
Okay. Ms. Brumstead, will this change the requirement of the annual submission of the universal health certificate or form?
So the focus on temporary exclusion in those 4 key grades is just regarding the attendance portion of the law. It does not adjust any of the legal requirements for all of our students to have all of the routine pediatric immunizations, to furnish a certificate of those immunizations as necessary, and to continue with all of the other annual well child visits.
Okay, so this is only in reference to exclusion.
Correct.
Okay. I think we probably should clarify that in our communications. And I don't know how you do that, but I can foresee a scenario where someone's saying, oh, well, I don't have to turn this into 7th grade because now, it's not something that you're going to require of me. And I think that we need to sort of make sure that is very clear with the LEAs, especially like, no, we're still requiring this form going forward. On that front, I wanted to ask, and it might be a little bit outside of the scope because we're talking about immunizations in particular, but it's on my mind because a couple of weeks ago, we had in the Committee on Health a hearing with the board chairs of a couple of our professional boards. In particular, dentistry came up, and I remember this because Dr. Iris specifically said, we require screenings for lots of different things. We don't require that kids get screened for dental, hearing, and vision, which if we think about, we'll put dental to, well, I don't know, you can get some pretty serious diseases of the mouth with the dental piece, but in particular, hearing and eye examinations, if I can't see the board, I can't learn. And if I can't hear the teacher, I'm also not learning. So have we been thinking about what that looks like in the context of preparing students on the health side for a strong educational year?
I'll take that one. So our staff does annual hearing and vision screenings through the health suite, and the nurses and health technicians will be able to support that. This summer in our summer block parties, a family affair, we're partnering with Howard University College of Dentistry to do oral screenings. So every child that attends is able to have an oral health assessment by the Howard students and residents. And we've also initiated a partnership with the vision screening provider who will do vision acuity for the students who attend those events as well.
Okay, so 2 points of entry, the block parties, if you attend, but then, I mean, when I was in school, it was this class is now coming down to the school nurse, and then you do the thing with the eyes and blah, blah, blah. And then if you failed it, they sent you home with a note to say your parent should get additional evaluation. So we're going to continue that for everyone.
So we require the family to consent for you to do that. So we do not do mass screenings any longer.
Wait, so you have to ask for permission to even determine whether or not your kid can read the eye chart?
That is correct.
Do we feel that that is effective?
We are in alignment with the.
I'm sorry to put you on the spot here, Dr. Drew, but I feel like that is a very basic, non-evasive, can you read the letters or should you be evaluated for glasses? Why do I need the parental consent in order to do that part? Dr. Farley?
And just adding that, first, there are 2 places where children can get screened for vision and hearing. One of is at the pediatrician's office, and the other is at the school. I consider the school kind of a backup to the pediatrician's office. They should be doing that. But yes, that screening is available. So this is the first time hearing about the consent initiative. So let us, if we could, just sort of investigate that further and see whether there's that policy is in place and is it necessary.
Okay. Okay. All right. So at the October 2023 hearing, we heard that the district was using 3 different databases to track vaccinations for children. Dr. Farley, you kind of mentioned this a little bit in your testimony, but can we talk about how we've streamlined this since then?
Yeah. One of the things we did, our change in the definition of compliance enables our data systems to be simpler.
Okay.
The database that houses the immunization records is called doses, and that will always be the case. For the most part, school-based staff don't need to access doses in order to find out whether a child is compliant. And we would encourage them instead to use our immunization compliance portal. That tool has been greatly improved since a year ago, where you go in there, if you're an authorized person, you log in with 1 click, you can get a spreadsheet view of every children in the school with a column that says whether that child is compliant or not. And if not, another column says what vaccines the child is due. Another couple of clicks, you can send letters to that individual child or to every child in the school who is non-compliant. So most of the people and most of the circumstances are going to be using just that one tool, the immunization compliance portal. It is pulling data from doses, but that is the front end, if you will, for school-based staff, whether they're nurses or the administrative IPOCs.
Thank you. Okay, I'm out of time. Chairman Mendelson.
Thank you. Thank you to each of the witnesses. Sorry I was a little late getting to the hearing. I was at a memorial service. I did have a number of questions. I think where I'm going to start is with the proposal to do immunization compliance through exclusions only in 4 grades. Dr. Farley, you said that those 4 grades align with the recommended age bands for vaccinations.
Yeah, that's why they were chosen.
To go down this path, doesn't this require a change in the law? And who am I going to ask this question of? Deputy Mayor Kine?
Yes, it does.
All right, and so who's giving us legislative suggestion?
We have been working, we've been working with council staff to do that.
Okay.
And I believe it's done. We have proposed changes, I believe.
All right, so staff, committee, the whole staff has legislative language that's been worked on by your office or by the executive.
Yes, by the relevant agencies, including DC Health, OSSI, and DME.
And the concept here is that the vaccinations are required at all grades, but in terms of enforcement, which is done through exclusion, the student is excluded from school, that would only be in these 4 grades.
That's correct. And there are a number of other changes which we're proposing, which we've talked about in some of the testimony, which basically streamline the process and make it much simpler for families, but accomplish the same results. So having a single date at which the exclusion would occur across all LEAs is one example of that.
Unlike this past year where for elementary school is a certain date and for middle school is a different date, just a single date.
That's right.
I'm concerned about the pre-K 3 enforcement grade because pre-K is not a compulsory attendance grade. So couldn't this have an unintended consequence of discouraging enrollment in pre-K 3? Or maybe I'll put that differently. Have you all looked at that as a possible issue? Who wants to answer that?
Thank you for the question. So for the temporary exclusion to only apply in these 4 grades, this is an additional layer that we are looking to add on to all of the general school health and then specifically school immunization efforts that we conduct every year. So with partnership with DC Health and Children's and the Deputy Mayor's Office, extensive outreach campaigns. Our Mayor's Office even had some campaigns last summer to ensure that we are reaching families and the broader community during the summer months. Our schools have taken on extraordinary measures, additional technical assistance sessions to make sure that they are accessing all of the communication toolkits and resources we have. So we will continue all of our ongoing efforts that happen year round to support and promote school health, promote attendance, to promote immunizations, and the exclusion is only an additional layer. We believe too, with the proposed change to move to a district-wide timeline that does not address exclusion until after count day, that will not only reduce the administrative burden for schools, but also give our newly enrolling families time to begin the pre-K school year. And if they are still acquiring appointments and need to catch up and then provide paperwork, we are providing time during the period where enrollment in schools is still not quite stabilized. So no, we do not believe it'll be a deterrent for enrollment and in the district's highly exceptional pre-K programs.
Not convinced, Dr. Farley.
I just want to add from a health perspective, we are particularly concerned about the 3-year-olds because the primary series of vaccines is given generally in the first 2 years of life. There are definitely children who never got that primary series. And so then they may come to school essentially completely unvaccinated. This is our real opportunity to get them to receive that primary series so that we don't have a measles outbreak in pre-K3 and that elementary school.
I'm not sure I disagree with any of that, except I'm not sure that I'm not feeling convinced that this issue of whether it could have a unintended consequences been thought through or addressed. What would be some strategies to overcome resistance? So let me go this way. Dr. Farley, you said there was about 20% non-compliance rate. Is that across all grades?
It varies by grade. It's generally higher in the middle and high schools.
Generally higher middle and high schools.
Yeah.
So,
but I take it back. It is also high in the pre-K3, pre-K4 grades.
Around 20%.
Yeah. I'd have to look at the numbers. It may be a little bit higher than that.
A little bit higher than that.
Yeah.
All right. I'm guessing, tell me if I'm wrong, that the 20% of kids or the 20%, the families of the 20% of kids are somewhat willfully not complying with getting vaccines. And I don't mean that in a legal sense because we're required, but in just a practical sense. These are not just, when you get to the ones who are not compliant, these are not the ones who, forgot or, they were too busy. It's like, it's taking a lot of work to get those folks to comply.
I'm sure there are some families like that, but it is clear that during the pandemic, when we had periods where it was difficult to get a primary care visit, we had a number of children who missed that primary series simply because they couldn't get into the doctor's office. And so there's a lot that probably are not opposed to vaccination and may not even be fully aware that they are due.
Well, then why is it so difficult to get from 20% to 0?
Yeah. To me, you need exclusion in order to make it happen. Parents will put things off.
Okay, but pre-K3 is voluntary. So it's easier for me to just not put my kid in school than to go through the hassle of a vaccine, since apparently it's a hassle to go through getting a vaccine because that's why they're not complying.
It was much less of a hassle now, let's say, than it was during the pandemic.
But the non-compliance rate is still 20%, plus or minus.
There are still plenty of kids who are unvaccinated.
Yeah, so what I'm looking for is if we're going to put in the law that you're only going to exclude at 4 grades, and one of them is pre-K3, which is not a compulsory education grade, are we going to unintentionally be discouraging enrollment in pre-K3? How are we going to deal with that? And I'm not hearing that. I think there's got to be an answer to how we're going to deal with that.
So Chairman, if I can just chime in here, I, first of all, fully agree with you. And I think what you're raising is the balance that we're making between whether and when to do exclusions versus the consequence on attendance. We talked about this a lot at the last hearing. We looked at it over the course of the pandemic. So when we choose to do exclusions, we expect that there is the potential that some students' attendance will drop as we do the actual exclusions. We agree with Dr. Farley, we're going to have to do them. It is currently a requirement under the law that pre-K students who attend school have their vaccinations. So if we're concerned that a legal requirement that you get your vaccinations is going to be a deterrent to attendance at school, then potentially we could also look at that. But given that it is the law and we consider it important that we do the exclusions in the most appropriate grades, we think this entry point is important. And then I'll just repeat what Ms. Brumstead said, which is that given the fact that we're doing the exclusion after count day, so the kids are fully enrolled in school, they're already attending school, we think it much less likely that the fact that they've got to complete their immunization is going to cause families to pull their kids out of their planned pre-K3 year.
Well, I would like more reflection on this issue that I'm bringing up. And maybe not in the moment, but we're not marking up the bill next week. I think this is an important question. And part of the answer could be that I'm wrong, but I just think that there's a point at which it's almost impossible to get people to comply. And we have two sides to the vice. One is mandatory compulsory education, have to be in school, kindergarten have to be in school, 7th grade. And the other side of the other part of the vice is you'll be excluded from school. And there could be some other consequences, like educational neglect or something along those lines. But that doesn't exist with pre-K3. And I'm assuming that there is some willfulness in people not getting the vaccinations. And so I think that just needs to be addressed. I think it needs to be addressed. That's not to say the answer is to not do the exclusion in pre-K3. It is my thinking, maybe we don't, until I see how it's addressed, that we don't require the exclusion or provide the exclusion in pre-K3. Because it's got to be addressed. It's we want kids in pre-K3. The research shows that that's very good for educational outcomes in the long run. I have more, just another round.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I will just say it's a very interesting exchange, but I'll add that, Mr. Chairman, we require students who are in congregate daycare settings to also be vaccinated. So before the age of 3, if you want your kid to go to daycare, they are also required to be vaccinated. And as you know, given our pre-K lottery situation, pre-K3 is actually an excellent year to compel someone to get their kid vaccinated, because it's either that or pay $25,000 for another year of childcare and lose your spot at your preferred school. Okay, a couple more questions. Dr. Farley, the main impetus of this legislation is around the COVID-19 vaccine requirement. I want to be very clear to people, we are not talking about taking off other vaccines that are currently required. But in the language, we allow for flexibility for DC Health and officials to change the requirement if necessary. And I'm curious what circumstances or metrics do you feel like the district would need to meet in order for that to occur? Is it a surge in new cases? Is it a new variant?
Yeah.
Speak to that.
Although we've been in this pandemic for 3 years, there's a lot we're learning about this virus and a lot that we can't predict. I can say that there is a non-zero possibility that in the next 6 to 12 months, we may get an entirely new variant out there to which almost no one has effective immunity. And we may be strongly recommending that everybody be vaccinated again from scratch. And under those circumstances, it might be reasonable to consider requiring vaccination as in order to continue in school. There may be other scenarios that I'm not thinking of now that we might want to consider that. But under the current rates where COVID infection rates are low, we think, and resistance to this vaccine is so high, it doesn't make sense.
Okay. The executive has proposed several other amendments to the legislation as introduced. And I have a couple of questions on that. So one, you're proposing expanding the mayor's authority to suspend immunization requirements for a maximum of 1 year to a quote, a period deemed reasonable by public health authorities. Why do you foresee this change being necessary? 1 year is a long time.
Thank you for the question. So the proposed change allows the public health authorities to determine the length of suspension, which could be a fraction of a year. It could go to a year or be more than a year, depending on those circumstances. An example might include if there is a vaccine shortage in the district, or if we are experiencing another public emergency or public health emergency that would inhibit students from securing the immunizations that they need to attend school. So the proposed change comes from the challenges faced during the COVID-19 pandemic. And while this chapter was never formally suspended during the pandemic, this language offers greater flexibility to DC Health to determine the length of suspension in the event that one would be necessary, and if it lasts longer than 1 year.
Okay. I also want to confirm, so in one of your amendments, you call out specifically independent schools and divide out schools, child development centers, and colleges and universities as, sorry, let me rephrase. I want to confirm that your amendments to call out independent schools and divide out schools, child development centers, and colleges and universities is intended to be a purely technical change and not taking away or adding any requirements for these entities. Is that correct?
That is correct.
Okay.
We know that they operate very differently.
Okay. All right. I want to talk a little bit about school nurses. So Dr. Boudreau, you mentioned at the very end of your testimony that you guys have already started hiring for the health technicians. And also, can we just clarify, what are we calling these folks? Because I think Dr. Farley, at one point you said student health professionals, and then Dr. Boudreau, you called them health technicians.
So their official title is student health technicians. They are allied health professionals.
Why is student part of that?
We currently have student health technicians in our staffing model today. So the student health technician has been a role within the structure of CSS since 2017.
Okay, so I guess student health
We're just
technician,
expanding.
the student part is indicating that they're working in schools, not that
Correct.
they themselves are a student.
Absolutely.
All right, we just need to clarify that, because I think for some folks, they might be like, wait, is this person still getting certified to administer first aid? So I just wanted to clarify that. Okay. You said you've hired 11 already.
Correct.
And you anticipate another 35 next week.
Correct.
Just good. Paced. How many do we need?
We need 92 for 2 per cluster. Our goal is for 3 per cluster, which would get us at 138.
Okay. And are you confident that we can meet that timeline?
We are confident that we'll have at least 92 by the start of the school year.
Okay. Now, you also mentioned 2 nurses as part of this cluster as well. What is our ratio in terms of the hiring for the nurses?
We currently employ all of the nurses we need. That was so the impetus.
As full-time, not temporary.
Correct. The impetus of this work was to reduce our need on staffing. So we have 91 nurses in our full-time employment at Children's School Services. The additional nurses that we report out are agency nurses. So that 150 number that you've seen, those 60 are agency. And that's where those 4 agencies that we discussed in the testimony are providing. So we have 60 agency, about 57 agency, 91 are full-time staff.
Okay. How can the local education agencies help DC Health and children share information about these new staffing models to ensure that families and school administrators are aware of the changes before the start of the school year? For example, I mean, I'm just trying to understand what are the communications that we're doing here, because we get a lot of feedback from school leaders around school nurses. And I don't want anyone in August to say, I didn't know. So what are you all doing over the summer to make sure that everybody is on the same page of music about what's going to happen for school year 23-24?
I am on a full summer tour with our colleagues at the Department of Health. So we've started that. We've had 4 visits with schools and then school leaders. We met with our OSSI colleagues, with the DCPS Central Office staff. We met yesterday with the instructional superintendents. We've met with the Charter School Alliance. Ms. Johnson mentioned that in her testimony. Unfortunately, there were not as many attendees at that meeting, but that information is available to them. I've made myself available to any school or LEA that requests us to come to the program. DC Health is also supporting a video Zoom program do you want to talk? I'll turn it over to Dr. Farley.
Yeah, I'll just say, in addition to the tour that Dr. Boudreaux mentioned, we're going to be holding town hall type events by video so that anybody can call in and see a presentation of what the new model looks like and have questions answered.
One of the things that was raised as a concern when we originally talked about this earlier this year was around situations where you have multiple schools who operate in the same building, but they are separate campuses. So I think we had someone testify earlier from KIPP. They have a couple of these situations where it's one building, but 3 different schools. How does this new model address that to ensure that it's not one nurse or one team member who is now responsible for all 3 campuses within this one building?
In this current iteration, we are staffing health suites. So if there's a school that has multiple health suites, so there are some schools in the district that have 2 health suites on their campus. Our KIPP partners have 1 health suite that has been approved for the program. So this model of staffing is only covering the health suites, which has been the function from the inception of our program. So the 3 schools that KIPP have on one campus, I'll use like the Douglas campus, that there's only 1 health suite. So there wouldn't be space for a second nurse. We do allow for schools to have 2 health suites. The example would be Czech, Columbia Heights. Bell has a health suite and Lincoln has a health suite. So if a school were to want multiple nurses, they would just need to apply for multiple health suites.
Okay, and I hear you on that. That's in the multiple, but I think we can acknowledge that all school enrollments are not made equal. So if we are doing these clusters based on geography, so for instance, I know we will get some calls from, say, some Ward 3 Jackson Reed cluster, because if you have 1 nurse or 1 whatever for Jackson Reed, Deal, Lafayette, we're talking about over 3,000 children.
Yes, I can share. We've actually met with the Ward 3 Education Network, and that came up. And so one of their requests, and so this is why this tour is important. When families raise concerns, we're able to make adjustments, which is why we really hope for families to come out and share their concerns so that we can come back and revisit how our model is staffed. In this model, there are 3 things. So geography is the first, but enrollment, medical complexity, the number of medications that are scheduled at the school, as well as the number of treatments that are administered daily, are how we decide how the clusters are. So there may be a situation where there's a school directly across the street, for instance, Jackson, Reed, and Deal. We have separated those 2 into 2 separate clusters because of the enrollment, even though they don't have the number of medications that some of our other schools have. Their enrollment alone made them difficult to put into a cluster together. So it was easier for us to say, we're going to have the nurse at Jackson Reed be with a few elementary schools, the nurse at Deal be with other schools, so that we can control for enrollment size as well.
Can you send us a list of the clusters? It sounds like, or your draft list of clustering?
We have a draft list. What we're hoping to do is finalize the number of the additional schools that will come into the program this summer. We have accounted for the schools that we're aware of, like MacArthur. We've had a number of charter schools that have also requested nursing coverage. We've accounted for those, even though they're not in the current template. We're working with the charter school board to ensure that we know all charter schools that are in the pipeline before we finalize, but happy to share the draft.
Okay, great. Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. Deputy Mayor Kine, in your statement, you said we do not want to be alone in the country requiring the COVID-19 vaccine for students. Can you explain that?
Currently, there are no other states that have a requirement.
What about other cities or counties?
None that we're aware of.
Ms. Brumstead, I was a little bit confused by the statement that OSSI supports these plans which align to the whole school, whole community, whole child model. I looked at the CDC framework. It doesn't speak to health suites, and it doesn't speak to enforcement or exclusion in 4 grades. So why would you say that?
The new Children's Health Suite model in terms of using a teaming approach that is driven by data and that incorporates evidence-based practices and a multidisciplinary team. Those are essential components of a whole school, whole community, whole child model. So that statement was in reference to the new model.
I'm not quite getting that with children's participation, but I didn't see anything in the CDC on the CDC website that speaks to the health suites without nurses or cluster of 4 schools.
So Chairman, I will just add to the statement. Our goal is to ensure that there's a consistent approach. Today, we move nurses because we have a 1-to-1 staffing model. So we move staff and they're not connected to their community. We had an emergency that came up earlier last year. When you go to the school site to see who to reach out to, everyone from the principal to the custodian is listed on there except for the nurse. There is no nurse because the nurses are not assigned to a school per se. They rotate today because we have so few. In this model, this team will be assigned to a cluster of schools, which will allow them to be better connected to their community, better aligned in.
Yes, but if I remember correctly, it is maybe 2 nurses for 4 schools. The 4 schools, if they are geographically close to each other, I don't know what happens if they're not 4 geographically close. Is it still a cluster of 4?
Yes.
So it could just be that there's more travel time and distance between the schools.
The greatest, I'm sorry, Jim.
What were you going to say?
Even the greatest distance, there's still the geographic proximity is still there. The example I'll give is the Deal Jackson Reed. While Deal and Jackson Reed are across the street from each other, they are in separate clusters because of the enrollment. So there are instances in our proposed model now that there may be a school that is closer, but because of the medical complexity or enrollment in the school, we've not clustered them together, but they're still, while Deal and Jackson Reed are in separate clusters, the elementary schools that they're a part of are still in Ward 3 and nearby.
So Jackson Reed is clustered with some other schools, not Deal.
Correct.
And the proposal is that there would be 2 nurses for the cluster, and there would be 4, no, I can't remember what they're called, technicians.
2 to 3 health technicians.
I thought it was going to be a health technician in each school.
So there are, in the 4 clusters, there will be 4 to 5 staff. So in the cluster of 4 schools, there will be an RN, 2 nurses, and 2 to 3 health technicians. So 4 to 5 staff for every 4 schools. So there will be at least there will be a person in every school. One school will have some of the clusters will allow for 2 people to be in one school so that if a nurse has to move.
And that is a person in the school at all times.
That is correct.
Now I want to go down a path that I'm going to get pushback, but I am troubled by the fact that nurses are not allowed to administer the vaccines. I'm just not getting that. We clearly have an access issue. The government has tried many different ways to deal with access. We still have 20% non-compliance. The easiest access would be in the school. And I'm not sure I'm going to get an answer that I'm going to find satisfactory, because I'm aware that the refrigeration requirement, there are all these requirements to make it difficult. And so therefore we don't do it. But the easiest way to ensure that more kids get vaccinated is to make it as easy as possible. And if it's not going to be the health suite, then it should be a van permanently parked out in front.
Yeah, thank you. I did address this a little bit in my testimony, but just to summarize, it is not impossible for nurses to offer vaccinations. However, because of the requirements we're under, it ends up being very difficult. And ends up being that the number of children that are vaccinated or can be vaccinated by a school nurse is small. What most places around the country that do any kind of vaccinations in schools do is what we're doing here, which is to have vaccine days where there is a mobile team that goes into the clinic and into the school and offers vaccinations, as well as having vaccinations available in school-based health centers. And also, I think I wouldn't totally agree with your argument that it's all about access as far as getting our children fully vaccinated. Compared to other states in the country, access to routine pediatric immunizations in DC is quite good. The difference really has to do with how consistently we enforce the mandate in schools. I'll just point out that the CDC puts out statistics on what % of kindergartners are fully vaccinated. And the two jurisdictions in the country that have the highest rates are Mississippi and New York City. So two very, very different places as far as access to care and a variety of services. What's different is that they are consistent with their school-based enforcement.
Well, that's an argument for enforcement in every grade, but we're getting away from that.
I would say ultimately, I would like to get back to the idea of enforcement in every grade. We have a long way to get there. And I think that for this coming year, doing it in these 4 grades is the right way to get started.
Last June, when the Committee of the Whole held a similar hearing on vaccines, my notes say last June, but I think we had a hearing in the fall. DC Health shared issues with incomplete data on routine pediatric immunizations in the District of Columbia Immunization Information System, which I think is called DOCSIS. Doses. I think in your testimony, you talked about improvements, but have we gone the full distance with the improvements and there are no longer any problems or complaints?
So well, there'll always be complaints, but our data systems are better than they were before. Let me say that the immunization registry gets data from a variety of different sources. It is more complete than ever. It will never be 100% complete. Children who are vaccinated in Wisconsin or children who are vaccinated in El Salvador, we won't have that record in our registry. That's why we have, as a backup, parents are required to bring in a universal health certificate to provide a paper supplement to that immunization registry. Nonetheless, the registry is more complete than ever. We will continue to connect more providers to it, and the user friendliness of it is much better than ever.
Are there complaints about user friendliness?
There definitely were last year.
Correct. How about now?
I think, our new systems are just sort of rolling out now, and not many people are using it right now. So I would hope we don't get many complaints this time, but it's really too early to say.
LEAs have access to the data?
Yes, LEAs need to designate 2 different people called immunization points of contact, IPOCs. Give us those names, and then we give them authorization to tap into the database. And at any time, if they have those names, they can go in there, and they can go in right now, and with one click, see which children are up to date and which children are not compliant.
As I recall, last year, there was a problem with data from Maryland and Virginia.
We are getting data from Virginia now. It's a batch process, and it'll be upgraded to a continuous process in the future.
How soon?
That is something we are dependent on the Centers for Disease Control to do, and we are pushing them. It should take place this summer, but it's not under our control.
But your testimony is should be this summer, and you're pushing for CDC to make that happen.
Yes.
But you said Virginia. What about Maryland?
We're already connected to Maryland in a real-time interface. I should be clear, though, that not every healthcare provider in Maryland is connected up to the Maryland immunization registry. This, connecting everyone up to these registries across the country is a multi-year ongoing process. So there will always be some children, even who are vaccinated in the region, that may not have all of their vaccinations in that system, which is why the paper backup is necessary.
So you referenced IPOCs, and Ms. Brumstead, I don't think you did testify about IPOCs. An IPOC is just a person in the health suite.
So we are requiring 2 IPOCs per school for this year. For schools that participate in the school health services program, that health professional or nurse will be the primary IPOC for the school. And for schools that do not participate in children's school health services program, they will need to identify 2 school staff to serve as the IPOCs. And we have already begun in partnership with DC Health and the Public Charter School Board and DCPS to identify who those 2 IPOCs are. We are grateful for the Public Charter School Board that has been helping to follow up with public charter schools that have not yet provided both of those IPOCs. We know some staff are transitioning, so we will do another round of checking in at the start of Summer Institute for staff to ensure that all of our schools have 2 IPOCs who are identified, who have gone through the DC Health training, which has been upgraded and is very robust to understand how to use the immunization compliance portal and are ready to go as they return to back to school.
I have follow-up, but I'm over my time, so I'll come back.
Okay, we'll do one more round of 5 minutes if that works for you, Mr. Chairman.
May.
Okay. I want to ask a clarifying question and sort of a follow-up to this enforcement question. So the language that you all sent us does not specify these particular grade bands. Is that going to be included in regs? I'm not suggesting we should put that in law because I want to your point, Dr. Farley, allow for some flexibility and us not to have a whole nother hearing to talk about enforcement. Ms. Brumstead?
Yes, that is correct. So our proposed changes to the law are to keep immunization policy strong. And then the subsequent proposed changes to regulation and guidance are where we can get at these specific attendance related issues, such as having a uniform timeline for the district and exclusion in those 4 grades. As Dr. Farley said earlier, our goal would be to use this enforcement at some point with all grades, and this allows us to do that shift in regulation versus changing it in code.
I had a meeting with some nurses, Dr. Boudreau, and one of the things that they raised was in this new model, you are essentially now setting up your nurses to be supervisors. Yes?
No, the nurses are peers to the health technicians. There is still a nurse manager in place. There will be a nurse manager who is responsible for the clusters that, so you remember there are clusters. There are a number of clusters for every team.
So who can make the call though of whether or not a student needs to be sent home?
The individual. So the health technician at the school, that there's a health technician in the health suite, the health technician does that. They do not need to call the nurse for permission.
So they can do diagnoses of this kid has a fever. Hey, mom, you got to come.
Correct. And to clarify, they are currently in place. So our staff today includes health technicians. They are not.
How many do you have?
Our budget allows for 17. At today, we have 11 on staff, which I know is also the number I gave you. It just is a coincidence. So that means there are 22 health technicians in our employ.
Okay.
11 of them are in schools today.
Okay. So just to be clear, if there is some type of emergency at the school, obviously, well, if it's an emergency requiring call 911, call 911. But for other types of diagnoses of, as what happened with my kid earlier this year, my husband and I were reminiscing of like, your toddler put a rock up her nose, you need to come get her. The health technician would be able to say,
absolutely,
it's a rock.
They're able to identify rocks.
I got that Elmo reference. I got that Elmo reference.
And there is, I also mentioned the telehealth devices. So in every school that participates in the school health services program, there's a telehealth device where if the health technician has a question, they can reach out to the nurse via a video, which is no different from what happens on every hospital unit that you call out to someone, hey, come help me with this, come check on this patient with me. Having that support and backup does not make them a supervisor, a colleague that can give input.
Okay. What is the collaboration, if any, with the student health professionals, the school nurses, and behavioral health staff that are already working in the school? Because there might be occasions where we're gonna have to work together. And I want to make sure that those introductions don't happen when emergency arrives.
We recommend that all of our nurses are part of the behavioral health team on the campuses. Some
Okay.
schools are better than others, which is why all of our staff, the nurses and health technicians, are going to be trained in mental health first aid so that they can address instances that come into the health suite in the moment. We do collaborate. Our nurses and health technicians will be able to make referrals to the behavioral health team. They do many assessments. We use a mental health pain score. The nurses and health technicians both are able to do those assessments. If the score is a 6 or above, that is an automatic referral to the behavioral health team.
How long is the training for your health tech individuals?
So they have a 2-week orientation. They come to us already as certified nursing assistants or EMTs. They have a 2-week orientation and then they're in the schools for 2 weeks. So a total of 4 weeks, but 2 weeks didactic in the school, in our corporate office.
That 2 weeks in the schools, is that during summer school as sort of like a hands-on, or summer school, summer camp, whatever? I want to make sure that, you know, EMTs are not necessarily always trained to work in pediatric environments. Working with a little person is a little bit different than working with an adult.
Absolutely. And so there's ongoing training. I mentioned that fourth component, that training and technical assistance. So there's ongoing training throughout the year. Orientation is that 2 weeks didactic, 2 weeks in the school. But there's ongoing work throughout the year that we support all of our staff, both the nurses and the health technicians.
Okay. Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. I just wanted to complete the thought regarding the 2 IPOCs, immunization point of contact in each school. That's the goal, or that will be what happens. But even though it says immunization point of contact, that's what they're called, they're not actually doing any immunizations.
That is correct.
And if there's a nurse, then that nurse will be an IPOC.
That is correct. If there's a nurse through the school health services program, that nurse will serve as one of the IPOCs, and then the school will identify another staff, which is usually a member of the registrar, front office, administration, to serve as the secondary IPOC.
I'm not sure who I'm asking this of, either Asi or the deputy mayor. What will the exclusion actually look like? And I asked the question because in the past year, my understanding is that for the most part, students who were excluded were simply marked with unexcused absence.
You mean operationally, what is it going to look like? Or
Yes.
how are we tracking attendance?
Operational.
I mean, operationally, and Ms. Brumstead can speak to this as well. It looked like any exclusion looks. We exclude for a number of different purposes, including non-residency, and families are contacted, students are held in the front, they're picked up on the day that their exclusion goes into effect. They're not allowed to be in the classrooms.
And you have the same answer?
I was going to ask if I could discuss the proposed calendar. That might
Yes.
give some more details. So again, we know that our schools have varying starts to the beginning of the school year. October 5th is our count day, is when our enrollment stabilizes and is verified. We have a week period following count day to allow for all of our data systems to speak to one another. And then after that blackout period, beginning October 26, 2023, schools will be set up to begin sending those notification of temporary exclusions. During that time period, OSSI will also be looking at the schools that have low immunization rates below 80%, and we'll be reaching out to those schools to say, hey, we need you to submit an improvement plan that identifies the strategies that you're going to use between now and the December 4th temporary exclusion date to really get your rate up. We were able to utilize that process this spring in partnership with DC Health for our schools that were below a 70 75% rate, and all of those schools submitted plans, and that allowed us to continue targeted technical assistance. If they had a strategy and they needed a resource, we could put that in place. So in addition to the schools continuing to do the work through the months of October and November to get as many students up to in compliance in those 4 grades, really in all grades, but in those 4 grades before the December 4th exclusion date, we will also be continuing to monitor data and provide technical assistance at a target
So the
level.
notices will go out October 26th.
Yes, at that
And-
point, notices will go out.
And there's a period of time to come into compliance. December 4th is the drop dead date for exclusion.
That is correct. And in between that, throughout November, there will be additional exclusion reminders, and then
Yeah.
schools will be, as of December 1st,
and-
we'll send the final
And
reminders out.
again, exclusion is the child either doesn't come to school, or if he or she comes to school, they're not allowed into classrooms.
That is
they're
correct.
Sent home.
That is correct.
During the first round of questions, there was some discussion about vision. I think I'm going to ask this of the deputy mayor, and this is not planned, but do you know if any LEAs have a memorandum of understanding with nonprofits for vision screening?
I do not, but I'm sure they do. Vision, as you know, is a requirement on the universal health form. You've got to be screened for vision there. So we're well used to families actually getting their kids screened for vision. And I have heard anecdotally of LEAs that do have those, but potentially my colleagues know more about this.
Well, I hate to disagree, but we had a hearing on legislation in 2019 where it was evident that maybe a quarter of kids need glasses and are unaware of that because there isn't adequate vision screening. The impetus for this was a nonprofit that provides free vision screening and glasses free of charge, prescription glasses, and it was being excluded from schools because it didn't have a certificate of need. The legislation that the council adopted allows for the certificate of need to be waived, and provided that there is a memorandum of understanding with an LEA. That's why I'm asking the question whether any LEAs have, and I'm guessing there are none, because I'm guessing that nothing's been done to facilitate this. Because I'm unaware of any improvement with regard to vision in schools. Dr. Farley.
And so there is an organization that does have an existing relationship with DCPS. They may have relationships to do this service in charter schools, but we don't necessarily know that because they independently arrange those relationships.
So your answer is there is at least one MOU.
There is at least one with DCPS, but regarding the charter schools, I can't answer that sitting here today.
Okay. Would you mind following up with more details?
I'd be happy to.
Thank you. Thank you.
Just a sort of follow up of that, I was talking to my staff, and it was the board chair for the Board of Optometry. And I know from Ms. Thompson at SHPTA, all of these physicians in the district have a certain level of uncompensated care that they're supposed to meet anyway. So this is actually a great way to partner with schools to do the vision screenings. We'll talk about parental consent of whether or not that's necessary, but it's a reminder for all of those out there who are practicing in the district. You have a certain level of uncompensated care you're supposed to do anyway. So partner up with one of our LEAs so we can make sure these babies have glasses. You have any other questions? All right. So thank you so much for your testimony. This concludes today's hearing. For those who were unable to testify, the record remains open for 2 weeks and will close on July 6th. If you want to submit written testimony for the record, you can email that to cal@dccouncil.gov. Oh, just kidding. You can do so at limbs.dccouncil.gov/hearings by 5 p.m. on July 6th. Thank you so much to the witnesses who testified. And this hearing is adjourned. Thank you.